Chapter 1382. It's a sacrifice, Yao Tao said in a low voice. The smile on her face disappeared as she stared at the falling hexagram in the distance, shock in her eyes. In truth, she was shocked by the actions of the ancient true saints. They didn't do anything, but when they did, they were ruthless to the extreme. They actually wanted to kill all the cultivators of the Western Desolation and that clan under the hexagram. Qin, you could clearly feel the terrifying aura contained within this six-pointed star. It was like a giant millstone, roaring as it spun at high speeds. Layers of strength tumbled like tides, wanting to destroy everything within. It was hard to imagine just how long these ancient true saints had prepared in order to complete such a horrifying and terrifying arrangement. And more importantly, were they not afraid of the retaliation from the Western Desolation and that clan? Qin, you didn't believe that the ancient true saints who had been planning this for a long time didn't know much about the Western Desolation and that clan. If they knew and still dared to do this, then they had no fear at all. But as soon as Qin Yu thought of this, he rejected it. Then the other possibility was that the ancient true saints didn't leave any path of retreat for themselves. Simply put, if they didn't succeed, they would either die in the volcano or use this opportunity to soar into the heavens. A sharp light exploded in Qin Yu's eyes. He had even more expectations towards the volcano that was wrapped in the super chaotic space turbulence. The reason was simple. If they didn't have absolute confidence, the ancient true saints wouldn't dare to take such a risk. They must know something, and they must be certain that there was something in the volcano that could change their destiny. As for killing people, Qin Yu didn't have any objections. In fact, he was happy to see it happen. He originally wanted to kill the Western Desolation and that clan, but now he was borrowing the hands of the ancient true saints to accomplish this. However, there was one point that Qin Yu had just realized. Sure enough, everyone was an actor. While you were acting, others were also part of the stage. For instance, when True Saint Seamless agreed to Qin Yu's conditions, it was clear that the ancient True Saints had already decided to act against the Western Desolation and that clan. At most, they were just pushing the boat along with the current. This was because if they wanted to start the ship and break through the super chaotic space turbulence to enter the volcano, not only did they need 2 keys, but they also needed a high-quality power to drive it. The cultivators of Shi Huang and that clan who were about to be sacrificed under these stars were clearly the providers of this power. As he thought about the countless lives of the vast Yang world that had been sacrificed to drive the ship, Qin Yu's last bit of unwillingness to watch the slaughter in front of him dissipated. This was because this was what the Western Wilds and their clan deserved. Yao Tao suppressed her initial shock and her sharp senses returned. She blinked as she looked at Qin Yu. Through the subtle expressions on his face and the indifference in his eyes, she was able to guess some of his thoughts. Before this, she only knew that Qin Yu was plotting against the Western Wilds and that clan. But now, it seemed that there was a great deal of personal grudges mixed in as well. Could it be useful information? Perhaps he could start from this aspect to break the deadlock between the two of them and make their relationship closer. Beneath the hexagram was a purgatory. It was unknown what kind of price they had paid or what kind of preparations they had made, but the 6 ancient true sages were able to display the power of their peak realms. The hexagram in front of them was actually formed by the great Taos of the 6 true sages. They borrowed the power of the restrictive array to continue and twist together, weaving together. The rules of Zeroth world were broken, and they instinctively countered the great Taos of the true sages. Now that 6 peak true sages had brazenly attacked with the crushing power of their great Taos, it was naturally impossible for them to remain indifferent to this. Thus, at the same time that purgatory descended, the 6 ancient true divinities were also placed in an extremely dangerous environment. The space outside the hexagram constantly shattered. Kacha! Kacha! Kacha sounds rang out incessantly. It was like a giant mouth of a piranha that wanted to drag them into a school of fish and eat them. But as old monsters that had lived for countless years, since the ancient true sages dared to attack, they naturally had a certain degree of confidence in themselves. At this time, their great Daos resonated with each other. The vibrating power that was produced tumbled within the hexagram, forming a raging, killing power. But there was also a part of it that covered them, resisting the threat from Zeroth world. Disregarding the risk that the 6 ancient true sages had to bear, the combined power of the great Daos that descended from the restrictive array was already a glorious victory. In short, there were miserable wails and cries within the purgatory. Broken limbs could be seen everywhere, and the smell of blood filled the air. The hexagram was a great Daos that were intertwined with the power of the restrictive array. Under the resonance, it was equivalent to simultaneously withstanding the terrifying power of the 6 peak true sages. The cultivators from the West Desolation and that clan were indeed strong, but they were far from being able to resist the combined might of 6 ancient true sages. If that was the case, the cultivators from the West Desolation and that clan who had the undying attribute would have cursed in anger and thought about taking revenge in the future. They wouldn't have been so terrified and naturally wouldn't have been worthy of the name Purgatory. No one could escape. To be more precise, everyone who was killed under the hexagram had truly died. That clan had the secret treasure of their clan and was also blessed by the will of the great wilderness, allowing them to be reborn in the spring of rebirth. However, too much of their bloodline had been destroyed. Less than half of the blood that escaped after awakening would give birth to an unfamiliar consciousness. This was no different from death. Of course, as cultivators from the desolate region, strictly speaking, they could be considered people from the higher realms. They naturally wouldn't sit still and wait for death. But the methods of the 6 ancient true sages were ruthless to the extreme. They were also meticulous and tyrannical to the extreme. All attempts to break through the hexagram ended in failure. Here, the incomparably formidable strength of the 6 ancient true sages was once again proven. Li Ijo's face paled and his body trembled. If it weren't for the 2 Western Desolation true sages protecting him with their own cultivation, he would have already collapsed. Another shockwave of killing power swept over. With a puff, Li Ijo spat out a mouthful of blood. He could clearly feel the threat of death. "Ah, Your Highness, save me. I don't want to die." With a scream, 2 Western Desolation cultivators not too far away exploded into pieces. Like those who had died before, their broken limbs were scattered everywhere. They didn't dissipate into the power of darkness. The stench of blood in the air became thicker. This scene happened not too far away, and it completely crushed Li Ijo's willpower. He had already discovered that the passage to the broken world of the southwest desolate region was temporarily cut off. Of course, he also understood that the strong reinforcements that he had been waiting for would never arrive. Escape. I have to leave this place. If not, he would end up like these people and become a pile of broken bones and rotten flesh. As for how to escape, Li Ijo took a deep breath. His eyes on his pale face were now bloodshot due to the mixture of fear and madness. 2 sages, the situation has completely gone out of control. Western Desolation can no longer hold on. If you and I stay here, only death awaits us. The 2 Western Desolation true sages' faces turned green. Do I need you to remind me of this? This hexagram was extremely strange. Even as a true sage, he wasn't confident that he wouldn't be implicated by the death of his doppelganger. It wouldn't be to the extent of dying. However, once his Tao was damaged, he wouldn't have a future to look forward to. To a cultivator, this outcome was at most 30% lighter than death. However, at this moment, Li Ijo wasn't in the mood to waste time talking nonsense. His eyes landed on him as he waited for him to continue. No matter what the reason for this defeat is, you and I will have to bear the responsibility. Therefore, regardless of whether you are willing to accept it or not, the 2 true sages and I are bound together. This was the truth. Time was tight. Li Ijo didn't know how many more attacks of the hexagram could he survive. Without any hesitation, he continued, Therefore, the two sages can only stand together with me and push the responsibility to Lisiji and his clan. This is why the rogue cultivators of the broken world benefited from this and led to this outcome. The two Western Desolation true sages' faces turned even uglier. If they knew that they would encounter such a situation when they descended into the broken world, they would rather offend the previous Desolation Emperor and reject without hesitation. However, now that things had come to this, there was no point in saying all this. Li Ijo was right. This unprecedented defeat could lead to immeasurable consequences. Even a sage might not be able to protect them. Someone had to take the blame. One of the true sages gritted his teeth. Sixth Highness, we know what to do. However, under the hexagram, how do we escape? If they could break the seal and escape, they would have done so long ago. Why did they have to hold on until now? Li Ijo's eyes turned even redder. My Western Desolation has a forbidden technique that can be used at the crucial moment. To protect you, I will retreat. Halfway through his words, it didn't stop the two Western Desolation true sages from understanding what he was referring to. Their expressions instantly changed. However, very quickly, an ominous glint appeared in their eyes. As the saying goes, a man must be ruthless. Between life and death, they couldn't care too much anymore. After all, these people were going to die sooner or later. Since that was the case, they might as well sacrifice one of their lives to ensure that they could escape. There was no need to communicate. Looking at the two true sages' expressions, Li Ijo already understood. He immediately shouted, "Sages, please help me." A moment later, the people of Western Desolation who were struggling to survive under the hexagram all paled. They turned their heads to look at Li Ijo, their eyes wide with disbelief. Then, like a leather water bag that had been filled with too much water, with muffled sounds, the remaining people of Western Desolation exploded one after another. Large amounts of blood fog rose up, howling as it gathered around Li Ijo and the two true sages. Blood moon. Amidst the screams, Li Ijo's eyebrows split open like a third eye had opened. Large amounts of blood spurted out. His blood was like fire, instantly igniting the blood fog. As it burned, a blood moon slowly appeared within the flames. It was like the shadow of the moon that was covered by the clouds in the dark of the night. It was blurry, and only a faint shadow could be seen. But it was this shadow that released a terrifying power. It instantly tore apart space and swallowed Li Ijo and the two true sages. Puff! Avicii Saint spat out a mouthful of blood. His chest was suddenly torn open by the crack in space. He stretched out his hand and touched his chest. The wound on his flesh healed instantly. He looked at the place where the blood moon disappeared and sighed. As expected of the desolation domain of the upper realm, the best situation today was, of course, for everyone under the hexagram to die. By then, even if Western Desolation and that race were enraged, they might not be able to lock onto them. Just as Chinyu had said, the ancient true sages who had been hiding in World Zero for many years knew about Western Desolation and that race very well. They knew how terrifying they were. It was impossible to say that they had no fear when they made their move today. But now, this possibility had disappeared. But the hexagram was still stable. Before they made their move, the ancient true sages were very clear that it was almost impossible to hide today's attack. Hence, they did not have much hope. As long as they could enter the Flaming Mountain and obtain the item left behind by the ruler, they would have the chance to make the leap and fill the vacancy of the ruler. By then, they would not have to fear the revenge of Western Desolation and that race. Other than Li Ijo and the two true sages, the rest of Western Desolation was wiped out. Beneath the hexagram, there was only that race left. Sir, you have a precious status. There cannot be any problems. Please consider the greater picture and immediately leave the broken world. Two phantoms of the clan elders appeared, their expressions dignified as they cupped their hands together. I apologize for offending you. Without waiting for 327 to nod, the two phantoms roared out loud. Source gathering! Bang, bang. Beams of blood-red light erupted from the body of that race cultivator, flowing into the two phantoms of the clan elders like 100 rivers returning to the river. Open. With a loud roar, the void violently shook. Layers of fluctuations rose up, drowning out 327's figure and causing it to rapidly fade away. Rumble, rumble. The hexagram above his head began to spin. Endless blood-red light shot into the skies. In the blink of an eye, all of it was absorbed by the hexagram, turning it crimson. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. He knew that this slaughter had ended. He was happy that Western desolation and that race had been exterminated, but even more so, there was a chill that came from the depths of his soul. They are very strong. Qin Yu, you had best be careful when cooperating with this group of old monsters. You absolutely cannot reveal any flaws. Yao Tao's words were exactly what Qin Yu was thinking. Looking at her, Qin Yu took a deep breath and said, "My name is Virtuous Nine Lives." Yao Tao smiled. "Don't worry, I won't expose you." As she spoke, her eyes flashed and she looked up. Qin Yu also sensed something. As his eyes fell on the area around him, space shook and 6 figures stepped out. Seamless Saint smiled and cupped his hands together. "Your Excellency, Virtuous Nine Lives, we have already cleared away all obstacles according to our agreement. We can now board the ship." Chapter 1383. Qin Yu cupped his hands, great sages. This praise came from the bottom of his heart. Until now, West Desolation and that race had never thought that they would be wiped out by the rogue cultivators of the Broken Realm. Seamless Sage smiled. "We were prepared. We were just caught off guard." Just as they were about to enter the main topic, someone interrupted. "Who is she?" His tone was cold and filled with dissatisfaction. Yao Tao raised her eyebrows and smiled. "Me?" Another ancient true sage said, "The daughter of the Peach Garden. If the garden master was here, she might be qualified to participate in this matter. You should leave now." She was being scolded. Yao Tao's smile widened. However, her beautiful eyes were filled with coldness. All true sages were proud. To be able to climb to the peak of cultivation, they naturally had the qualifications. Moreover, with the aptitude of a soul seed avatar, it was 10 times or even 100 times more difficult to achieve today. In order to stay by Qin Yu's side, she had no choice but to reveal her shameless side. Even though she did not care about his coldness, it would be a lie to say that Yao Tao was not annoyed and angry. In other words, the true sage of the big space and small space happened to choose one. Yao Tao was not in a good mood, so she ran into trouble. Qin Yu frowned. Then he calmed down. Since Yao Tao wanted to stay, she could only solve the problem herself. However, this situation should not be difficult for her. While thinking, Yao Tao took a step forward and repeated what she said. "Me." Her voice didn't change, and her tone didn't change either. But with just a step of difference, the feeling she gave off was earth-shattering. Like a phoenix spreading its wings, her eyes were wide open and cold. Between her mouth and tongue, flames were rolling. It was as if she could destroy the world at any time. Horrifying and terrifying. Apart from Qin Yu, everyone, including Seamless Sage, had a change of expression. Obviously, they did not expect that a junior that they did not think highly of would have such terrifying strength. Strong, very strong, so strong that it made their hearts palpitate. The peak of true sage was without a doubt. Then the ancient true sages reacted. The person in front of them was not Yao Tao. Instead, she was an ancient existence that was not inferior to them. This was because at this moment, the aura that Yao Tao was releasing revealed a dim but incomparably dense aura of time. Others might not be able to sense it, but as an old monster, he could keenly sense it. True divine, Seamless cupped his hands together. "I do not know the identity of this fellow Taoist. If I have offended you in any way, I ask that you forgive me. I, Seamless, welcome you to join us." Cultivators did not differentiate between men and women. The only thing they recognized was cultivation. Yao Tao. After reporting her name, Yao Tao glanced across at the large and small space, true saints. Then she returned to Qin Yu's side and took his hand without hesitation. Under the current circumstances, this was the most direct and forceful declaration. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows, but before he could say anything, Yao Tao's voice sounded out in his mind. This group of old monsters is very strong, and they definitely don't have any good intentions. Doing this will cause them to dread us a bit more and reduce the chances of trouble. That was the truth. After thinking for a while, Qin Yu suppressed the uneasiness in his heart and maintained a calm expression. He looked at the few ancient true sages and said, "If no one has any objections, let's go." Without batting an eyelid, Qin Yu pulled out his arm and avoided Yao Tao's soft chest. Then he was the first to fly towards the ship. "9 virtuous sage, you damned ghost, wait for me!" Yao Tao coquettishly shouted. She stood up and chased after him. She pouted, her face flushed red with anger. She didn't have the slightest bit of the World Annihilation Phoenix's domineering attitude from before. Seamless Sage frowned. Then he composed himself and said, "Everyone, let's go." Whoosh, whoosh, everyone shot into the skies. Feeling Yao Tao approaching him, Qin Yu frowned. "Do you understand the principle of going too far is as bad as not enough? Doing this will only arouse suspicion." Yao Tao blinked. "Is that so? I don't understand. Can you teach me?" "Bah, if you don't understand, do you think I'll stand upside down and drink water?" Qin Yu turned and glared at her. Her eyes were filled with coldness. Yao Tao shrank back and pouted. "Don't look at me like that. I'm afraid. Fine, fine. I'll speak the human language. Don't you think it's a good choice to make them doubt us? Then, when they are about to do something, they will suddenly discover that our relationship is much closer than they thought. We can catch them off guard." Qin Yu's face was stiff. He thought, when did the relationship between the two of us become so close? How come I didn't know? He was too lazy to speak with her. He sped up a little and pulled open the distance between them. Soon, there was a light thud as Qin Yu landed on the ship. The smell of blood surged in his nose and mouth. It felt as if the smell of blood was far more active than the last time he boarded the ship. Yao Tao and the ancient true saints followed close behind and boarded the ship. There was no time to think too much. Qin Yu quickly suppressed his thoughts. He turned to look at them and said, "I think all of you are aware that driving the ship requires not only a key, but also a high-quality energy." He pointed a finger at the blood-red hexagram. "So, I'll have to trouble all of you." The great space, true, saint sneered. "We didn't agree to provide energy to drive the ship." Thinking about it, it was because he had suffered losses at the hands of Seamless Sage and Yao Tao. He was in a bad mood and wanted to redeem some face for himself. However, it was obvious that he had chosen the wrong person. Qin Yu looked at him indifferently and said, "Oh, if the sages don't agree, I naturally can't force you. Then let's get off the ship and discuss the results before deciding how to drive the ship." He turned to leave, but was stopped by Seamless Sage. "Sir Virtuous 9 Lives, please don't be angry. We are willing to provide the energy to drive the ship." As he spoke, he looked at the great space true saint. "I believe that Brother Su Yan won't have any objections." Great space, true Saint Su Yan's complexion paled. He clenched his teeth and coldly snorted, "I don't care what you want to do." Qin Yu looked at Su Yan, a bit more vigilant in his heart. For someone to cultivate to the true saint realm and live for such a long time, it was impossible for him to be a brainless and reckless person. In other words, it was likely that what Qin Yu saw now was only a side of Su Yan that Su Yan deliberately revealed. Once an impression was formed in one's mind, it would be extremely stubborn and would greatly affect one's judgment. Qin Yu did not wish for himself to make a mistake in the future and fall into a trap for no reason. Of course, there was no need to show what he was thinking in his heart. Hence, Qin Yu's cold eyes revealed a hint of mockery as he glanced at Su Yan, whose complexion was getting uglier. Regardless of whether this person was standing on a stage or not, he had to be a qualified actor. Thank you, true sages. Qin Yu flipped his hand, and the 2 keys that he had obtained from the West Desolation and the other race appeared in his palm. The ship seemed to have sensed something. Buzz, buzz. Slight vibrations came from the interior of the ship. There was a hint of desire and excitement. The smell of blood in the air became even stronger. Seamless Sage's eyes flashed, and he said in a deep voice, "Everyone, let's join hands and summon the 6-pointed star to drive the ship." The 6 ancient true saints formed their hand seals at the same time, and a crimson 6-pointed star that had eaten its fill of fresh blood flew over. As it got closer to the ship, its size shrunk rapidly. When it reached the ship, it was only the size of an adult's head. The color of the 6-pointed star became even redder. When one looked at it, one could see countless waves of blood rolling around. Distorted faces appeared one after another and were broken into pieces. Qin Yu frowned. He could clearly feel that, at this moment, the buzzing sound of the 6 true saints was getting stronger, and there was a hint of greed in it. The smell of blood in his mouth and nose was getting stronger. He felt uneasy as he glanced at the 6 ancient true saints. However, he could not sense anything. This was normal. If a group of old monsters that had lived for countless years were so easily detected by others, they would have died many times over. How could they have lived until today? There was a problem. However, since things had reached this stage, there was no choice but to release the arrow. Of course, there was one more thing that could be said. The skilled were bold. That's right, it was because one was strong enough. Even if there was a problem, one could still solve it. Feeling the 2 keys struggle free, Qin Yu loosened his grip. He simply didn't. He needed to activate them to fly out and integrate into the ship. At the next moment, the ship under his feet seemed to be activated. It opened its greedy mouth and swallowed the blood-red 6-pointed star. Then, an incomparably thick, blood-red color instantly shrouded the entire ship. At the same time, a howl that was as sharp as a rusty nail suddenly rang in his ears, piercing into his brain fiercely. Qin Yu groaned, and his face turned pale. Of course, his performance was 30% real and 70% fake. He looked at the other side. The ancient true saint group seemed to be prepared. They were not afraid of the attack at the soul level. All of them looked extremely calm. When Qin Yu looked at them, they also looked at him. There was an inexplicable meaning in their eyes. Rumble, a low and loud sound, came from the inside of the ship. It was like a huge turbine that was activated. While it released a surging force, it also caused the ship to shake violently. The ship slowly moved forward. Success! In the eyes of the Avicii saint, there was a trace of hidden excitement. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "There is still a period of time before we can pass through the super explosive space turbulence. Before that, what we need to do is to resist the vengeful spirits on the ship." After a slight pause, he looked at Qin Yu and said, "If the 2 of you are not prepared in advance, you have to be more careful. The vengeful spirits on the ship are still very strong." He turned around and quickly disappeared in the blood-red color. The big and small space true saints had cold eyes. They glanced at Qin Yu and Yao Tao before turning around and walking in another direction. The 3 ancient true saints, who had the lowest sense of presence and didn't speak after seeing each other, nodded and said, "The 2 of you have to be more careful." Soon, only Qin Yu and Yao Tao were left on the deck. The blood-red color in front of them was like a sea. There were mournful howls in their ears. Shadows kept flashing past. The murderous aura invaded their minds, causing their bodies to tense up instinctively. To put it simply, it was like 2 living people had fallen into the underworld of ghosts. Qin Yu frowned. He wasn't really afraid of the blood-red color and the vengeful spirits hidden in the darkness. Rather, it was because Yao Tao was sticking close to him again. Her warm and soft touch touched his arm. Qin Yu retreated a little, but he didn't succeed. Instead, Yao Tao hugged him even tighter. "Don't go, I'm scared." Her voice trembled and her body trembled. The more they touched, the more they collided. Qin Yu stiffened. He turned to look at her. Yao Tao's face was pale, and the fear in her eyes didn't seem fake. This woman was actually afraid of ghosts. Even though Qin Yu's rationality told him not to believe her, he hesitated and didn't try to pull back. He glanced at the deck. He could clearly see that there were countless tear marks on it. The ship was about to enter the super explosive space turbulence. Continuing to stay here was not a wise choice. He took a deep breath and calmed his mind. He tried not to make any noise and said, "Let's go in too." Yao Tao nodded again and again. She followed beside him, and the two of them disappeared into the blood-red color. There was no one on the deck. But not long after Qin Yu and Yao Tao left, a pair of eyes appeared where they had been. It was hard to describe just what sort of eyes these were. Sometimes they were clear, and sometimes they were cruel and ruthless. They stared in the direction the two of them left in, gradually revealing a burning heat. Woo, 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 a cold wind blew past. The blood-red color tumbled, and the pair of eyes that appeared vanished from sight. Rumble, rumble, violent sounds came from outside. The entire ship violently shook. Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. He knew that they had entered the super-explosive space turbulence. Although he knew that the Western Desolation and that race relied on this ship to enter and exit Blaze Mountain, it was still something that was stolen. Moreover, the original owner had been killed and thrown into the ship to drive it. Qin Yu had no idea whether or not there would be any problems, and now was clearly the time to test it out. The good news was that no accident occurred. The entire ship emitted a blood-red light as it forcefully resisted the tearing of the turbulent space turbulence. At the same time, the fiercely shaking ship also began to stabilize. Chapter 1384. The ship had been destroyed, and the group of them had racked their brains to think of all sorts of methods. But in the end they had all been exterminated. Such a tragic event hadn't occurred. Qin Yu secretly let out a sigh of relief. But his expression didn't relax at all. This was because the blood-red coldness in front of him was constantly trying to seep into his body. This wasn't a good feeling, in truth, to a high-level cultivator. These resentful spirits were nothing more than fragile ants that could be casually erased. But there were no absolutes in this world. There were always exceptions. For instance, this ship that had experienced countless blood sacrifices and killed countless lives. After endless years of accumulation and under the influence of the sacrificial array formation, no one knew just what sort of terrifying existence would be born. But even so, with Yao Tao's cultivation, there was no need for her to show such fear and helplessness, right? Still, this feeling was very real. Women were indeed born actors, and this was especially true for beautiful women. Thinking this, Qin Yu looked back at Yao Tao. After entering the cabin, this woman had been quiet for a long time. At this time, her eyes were closed, and she was leaning against a corner of the cabin. Her curled-up body was like a weak little animal. She had actually fallen asleep. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes and suddenly frowned. Something was wrong. Shua! Qin Yu's figure flickered, and he arrived in front of Yao Tao. His complexion was dignified, surprise in his eyes. He hadn't realized when this woman had fallen into a trap. Qin Yu didn't rashly attack. He didn't try to wake Yao Tao up. After a moment of hesitation, he reached out a hand and slowly touched the point between her eyebrows. The moment his finger touched the cool skin between her eyebrows, a powerful pulling force suddenly erupted, instantly bringing Qin Yu into an illusion. Blood, a lot of blood. It flooded the entire world. His nose and mouth were filled with a thick smell of blood that left him breathless. Suddenly, a hand appeared and frantically swiped at it. The world in front of her suddenly became clear and then violently shook. So it wasn't blood that flooded the world, but blood that covered her face. But to her, this didn't seem to make any difference. Perhaps it was because he had entered an illusion. But Qin Yu was able to clearly feel the fear and despair she felt as she fled. Flee! She crazily fled. There was no direction, no destination. She didn't dare to stop at all. Dead, they were all dead. Intense fear nearly destroyed her ability to think. The scenes that Qin saw were mostly distorted and incomplete. But this didn't prevent him from deducing the approximate outline. Who did all of this? Why was she being hunted? Could this matter be related to the peach orchard? The third point was quickly rejected. This was because if it was really the peach garden that attacked, it meant that Yao Tao had already been exposed. With the peach garden master's means, she would definitely not give her the slightest chance to escape. It was also because Qin Yu was now sure that what he was experiencing right now wasn't an illusion, but some sort of memory reading. The main character was Yao Tao. Suddenly, the scene changed and a bottomless, pitch-black hole appeared in front of him. An extremely cold and gloomy aura kept coming out from it. The scene changed, and it was as if a peach had turned around to look, and a group of black shadows were chasing after it. She jumped off the cliff. The cave was very dark, so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. The cave was very cold, the kind of cold that penetrated deep into one's bones. Moreover, it was very, very deep. After Qin Yu jumped in, he rapidly fell down, as if there was no end. There were ghosts in the cave. In Qin Yu's eyes, this was a place where negative yin and cold energy gathered. It was a natural array that could automatically absorb the surrounding souls. Being sucked into it was like falling into purgatory, forcefully turning one into a violent creature that could be called a ghost. The fallen Yao Tao became sweet food in their eyes. Countless ghosts swarmed over from all directions. They stirred up the yin wind and made woo-woo sounds as they desperately drilled into Yao Tao's body. They all wanted to devour her soul and occupy her body. The battle between the ghosts began with Yao Tao's body as the battlefield. They crazily bit and devoured each other in an attempt to become the final victor. Because of the slaughter of the ghosts, Yao Tao was temporarily able to survive, but it was impossible for her to not be implicated. Every ghost wanted to eat her. As they fought, they didn't forget to take a bite out of her so that she wouldn't be swallowed whole. Thus, the state of 10,000 ghosts devouring one soul was created. Nowadays, the world situation had stabilized, and there were very few large-scale battles that erupted. The once popular ghost path had gradually faded away, and there were very few new cultivators that were able to hear anything about the ghost path. But to some old antiques that had lived for countless years, 10,000 ghosts devouring one soul was something that left them aghast. For instance, the stone pagoda. His sigh was filled with shock and emotion. He took a deep breath and slowly said, "No wonder she has such a cultivation level with her soul-dividing stage talent. This woman is amazing." The scene changed again. After an unknown period of time, Yao Tao suddenly opened her eyes from the ground. Her black pupils had completely vanished, leaving behind only a pale gray color. Thus, the tribulation of 10,000 ghosts arrived. The countless ghosts that tried to devour Yao Tao's soul revealed looks of panic, as if they had encountered something extremely horrifying. As they screamed, they loosened their jaws and fled. Yao Tao screamed at the sky, and her voice seemed to be extremely lethal to the specters. The specters that were trying to escape in fear all exploded into dust, forming clouds of black and red mist. As her screams fell, Yao Tao took a deep breath. Countless black and red fog howled towards her and submerged into her body. But to Yao Tao, this process didn't seem to be enjoyable at all. Or, it would be more accurate to say that she was withstanding torment. The surface of her body constantly bulged out, and then her flesh and blood rapidly cracked apart. These cracks formed a twisted face that wanted to tear apart her flesh and blood and rush out from her body. Qin Yu was only a bystander and couldn't personally understand what Yao Tao was feeling right now, but he could sense her pain and despair. This was a memory reading. In other words, everything that happened to Yao Tao. Qin Yu suddenly understood why she had felt such fear before. It was likely that the resentful spirits on the ship and the environment had caused her to recall these memories. However, for these resentful spirits on the ship to choose Yao Tao as their target, it might not have been a wise decision. A resisting strength suddenly pushed Qin Yu's consciousness out. His heart shrank as if it had been grasped by a giant hand. As his feet fell, Qin Yu drew backwards. In the next moment, the unconscious Yao Tao opened her eyes. They were all gray and white. Her lips curved up in a sneer. When contrasted with Yao Tao's pale complexion, it caused her entire temperament to change. She was cold and mysterious, like a fairy walking in the darkness, easily harvesting everything. She glanced at Qin Yu, interest clearly flashing in her gray eyes. Then she opened her mouth and screamed. No, Yao Tao didn't make a sound. Rather, what she released was a short and violent tremor. Qin Yu's mind instantly blanked out. Found you. Yao Tao suddenly spoke. She gently licked the corners of her lips and then turned around and grasped behind her. Although there was clearly nothing there was a dull popping sound in her palm. It was clear that she had caught something. A shadow struggled to appear. It had countless tentacles, and each tentacle was covered with eyes. At this time, a massive number of tentacles were tightly wrapped around Yao Tao's arm, but they couldn't harm her at all. It was as if in her pale state, all ghosts and monsters were nothing but cabbages to her. Little thing, your courage is quite good. Or did you know that Big Sister has been sleeping for too long and is feeling a little hungry, so you delivered yourself to my doorstep? Then I won't be polite. Yao Tao smiled and drew back her hand. She pulled the tentacle shadow closer and opened her mouth to suck in a deep breath. With a dull popping sound, the tentacle shadow was torn to pieces. Countless fragments tumbled about, submerging into Yao Tao's body. Hiccup! Yao Tao comfortably patted her belly. Not bad, not bad. The taste is wonderful, in my words. You can eat more. Suddenly, she frowned, as if she were tasting something else. Yao Tao made her move again, and a low, muffled sound rang out, as if some kind of taut string had suddenly been snapped by force. Her gray eyes stared ahead, and her lips curved up once more. I was wondering why such a small thing dared to attack me. So there was a big fellow behind me. You're just a little timid. You dare to do it, but don't dare to admit it. Why are you running so fast? Yao Tao licked the corner of her lips again. It was as if she was muttering to herself, but also as if she was making a public announcement. Just you wait. I will definitely eat you. After saying that, she suddenly frowned, and a hint of dissatisfaction appeared in her eyes. But soon, as if they had reached an agreement, Yao Tao glanced at Qin Yu, smiled, and closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, her pale eyes had returned to normal, and the mysterious aura of a night elf had disappeared. Yao Tao forced a smile. Her pale face was pitiful. She didn't scare you just now, right? Qin Yu shook his head, his expression solemn. Just now. My second personality. Yao Tao pursed her lips. You should have guessed it. It was at that moment that she appeared. I hate this feeling of having control of my body suddenly taken away, but I have to admit that if it weren't for her, I would have died. She looked at Qin Yu. If you want to protect Peach Girl from harm, then this is the best chance to kill me. Otherwise, please protect me well, because I really am a little scared. She closed her eyes. This time, Peach Girl really did fall asleep. It was clear that the appearance of her second personality had taken a tremendous toll on her. Qin Yu frowned. He had to admit that Yao Tao's words did tempt him a little. It was impossible for Yao Tao to remain an avatar. If she wanted to live, then Peach Girl would have to die or be swallowed up and fused with. But this wasn't important. What was important was that Ningling, who was also a soul seed avatar, would inevitably be implicated. This was something that Qin Yu could not allow. But if he wanted to kill her, not to mention whether or not her second personality would suddenly appear, His intuition warned him that recklessly killing her might not be the right choice. It was also because of this that Qin Yu hadn't tried to kill Yao Tao even after seeing her. If he didn't kill her, he might be able to do something else. For instance, he could lay down some spells so that he could counter her in the future. He certainly had to ask the stone pagoda about this. As a nearly omnipotent being, he had forced her to put on an act before. Now was the time to show his strength. The stone pagoda refused. Master, it would be best for you to put away such thoughts. As a survivor of the 10,000 ghost-devouring soul, and one who even swallowed 10,000 ghosts, Yao Tao's soul has undergone an inconceivable transformation. If it weren't for the fact that she was congenitally deficient and only had a mere soul seed, I fear that the position of Vastyong ruler would have long since ceased to exist. Chapter 1385. Li Siji's face was pale, and his eyes were filled with fear. He had known about the broken world of the southwest desolate region a long time ago, even though he had publicly stated that he was cautious and took the southwestern desolate region's shattered world seriously more than once. He didn't dare to underestimate it. However, in reality, the arrogance of the upper realm prince still existed. He had an instinctive sense of superiority towards the living beings in the broken world. But today, reality had taught Li Siji a cruel and bloody lesson. West Wasteland and that race had almost been wiped out. These broken world cultivators had seized the ship and used it as a fuel for the blood sacrifice. They had already charged into the super explosive spatial turbulence. Their target was the blazing mountain. Damn it, damn it. How could they dare to do such a thing? The Western Wasteland and that race would definitely not let this matter rest. They would definitely pay a painful price for their actions. But that was a matter for the future. Right now, there was only one thought in Li Siji's mind. He must not be discovered. Yes, he was on the ship. Previously, it was mentioned that the ship was jointly built by the Western Wasteland and that race. It was the key to entering and exiting the super explosive space turbulence and exploring the Flame Mountain. This kind of thing, of course, had to be left behind in case of emergencies. The cabin Li Siji was in now was one of them. It was a secret room inside the ship's hull. It was impossible to enter using conventional methods. But after going through special arrangements, it was hidden inside and very difficult to be discovered. He had to wait until the ship entered the mountain of flames. When the broken world cultivators left the ship to explore, the chance he was waiting for would come, to take the ship away. At that time, these powerful broken world cultivators would be trapped in the flaming mountain. All of them would die here. No one knew that when the war was in full swing and the killing was raging, the third prince of the West Wilderness had already quietly hidden in a secret cabin of the ship. Therefore, if things were to proceed normally, Li Siji's plan might really succeed, and he would be able to turn the tables and scam everyone. But since he had said so, the way things were progressing was definitely not like that. The vengeful spirits on the ship knew everything. Unfortunately, the most terrifying one among them had already locked its gaze onto Li Siji. The dark cabin was also filled with the color of blood. Suddenly, as if he had dropped a boulder, the blood in front of him shook violently. Li Siji raised his head, and his pupils shrank as if he had sensed something. Even so, it was too late. Or rather, the thing rolling in the blood was too fast, so fast that it did not give him any time to react. Ah! Li Siji could only let out half a scream of pain before it was forcibly cut off. Li Siji's eyes widened, and the blood vessels on the surface of his body rapidly inflated. It was as if something had drilled into his body and was spreading wildly. His entire body swelled up, and his violently distorted face was enough to show the terrifying pain he was currently enduring. All of this happened in silence. In the completely enclosed cabin, the color of blood surged like layers of stormy waves. Li Siji froze on the spot, his face twisted. His flesh swelled and twitched, but no sound came out of his mouth or nose. This scene was terrifying to the extreme. Shwa! A pair of eyes emerged from the blood-red light. staring at Li Siji in front of him. Ruthlessness and coldness alternated in the depths of his eyes. Obviously, it was trying to burrow into Li Siji's body to devour him, or to temporarily occupy this body. There were no weaklings on the ship. Li Siji, who had snuck in, was the best choice. But in reality, as a prince that was highly regarded by the current desolate emperor of the Western Wilderness, there were some terrifying things hidden within his body. For instance, being possessed was something that could not be allowed. If there were no such precautions, the great Western Wilderness Emperor's inheritance would have already attracted countless old monsters. Ah! Li Siji screamed. Not only was there despair in his blood-red eyes, but there was also madness. Within his body, the method that the Western Wilderness Supreme Elder had laid down to prevent his body from being possessed had now been activated. The eyes that appeared in the blood-red light revealed shock and anger. With a loud rumble, the blood-red light in the cabin began to tumble, becoming even more intense. It struggled, trying to leave Li Siji's body, but, like a large fish caught in a capstan, it was slowly pulled in. Putong! Li Siji fell to the ground, his entire body devoid of breath. He was like a corpse. But now, lines of blood had appeared on the surface of his body, densely interweaving with each other to form strange patterns that covered every inch of his exposed flesh. In the deathly silence, the tumbling blood-red light gradually calmed down. After an unknown period of time, the fallen Li Siji suddenly opened his eyes and gasped for breath. It was like he had been buried underground for a long time and had finally managed to escape, greedily breathing in the air of the outside world. Slowly climbing up, Li Siji looked down at his hands. His eyebrows furrowed together, and he muttered, I am Li Siji, the Western Wilderness, third prince. I am also the strongest resentful spirit born from the blood sacrifice on this ship. They are both me, and also not me, but that doesn't seem important. What's important is that I have important matters to attend to. Licking his lips, Li Siji revealed a smile. Yao Tao, you whore, we will meet again soon. Shua! With a single step, his body seemed to fuse into the blood-red light, vanishing from sight. Qin Yu was deeply disappointed that he couldn't do anything to Yao Tao. His methods weren't honorable, and his target was a woman? Haha, was that important? If he couldn't even do something like this, he would have been killed off long ago and wouldn't have lived to this day. Glancing at the corner where Yao Tao was still sleeping, Qin Yu sighed, a helpless expression on his face. He already had a premonition that nothing good would come out of being stuck to this woman. Now, his premonition had come true, let alone helping her. He would have to divert some of his energy to protect her. What a sin! Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows. As he was thinking about when Yao Tao would wake up, would he have to carry her into the mountain of flames? His heartbeat quickened, and a trace of fear gushed out from the depths of his heart. He took a step back and hugged Yao Tao. Qin Yu swept his eyes around, a sharp light surging in his eyes and a chilling cold. Something had come. Qin Yu's intuition told him that this other party's goal was Yao Tao. Not only was this woman of no help, but she was also clearly a troublemaker. She was like this when he was ambushed, and now she was also like this. Could it be related to the 10,000 ghosts devouring soul that the stone pagoda spoke of? The chill in his heart deepened, although the blood-red light in front of him didn't change at all. Qin Yu knew that something had already broken in. It was in the cabin. Master, behind you. The stone pagoda's voice suddenly sounded out. Qin Yu didn't hesitate at all. He turned and punched out. A wild strength raged out, instantly causing the blood-red light in front of him to disintegrate. Vaguely, the outline of a figure appeared, as if it hadn't expected that it would be discovered. It was struck by the punch. With his first strike succeeding, Qin Yu didn't hesitate at all. He held on to Yao Tao tightly as he stepped forwards and punched out again. But this time he didn't hit the other party. After being punched, the person retreated back into the blood-red light and vanished from sight like a shadow. Qin Yu frowned. He sensed his surroundings with rapt attention, and the fear in his heart gradually dissipated. It was clear that whatever had entered the cabin had left. The stone pagoda confirmed this. "Master, he has already left." Qin Yu asked, "Who is it?" The stone pagoda was silent for a moment. It said, "A very strange aura. It has the characteristics of both a living and an inanimate object. I have never seen it before." Qin Yu said, "You are saying that besides us and the 6 old monsters, there are others on this ship?" The stone pagoda said yes. Qin Yu took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. His eyes were dignified. It seemed that things were far more complicated than he had imagined. Li Siji rapidly shuttled through the blood-red light. His complexion was ugly and ruthless, and deep within, there was also a faint trace of fear. The man beside Yao Tao was extremely strong. He had actually discovered his traces. Moreover, what was more important was that there was a weak aura contained within that punch. It wasn't strong, but it caused Li Siji to feel the threat of death. Otherwise, with his current state, he wouldn't have been injured by a mere punch. Although he didn't want to admit it, Li Siji knew that it was impossible for him to catch Yao Tao with his own strength. He needed helpers. His eyes darkened. Li Siji suddenly sneered and looked towards a certain cabin on the ship. It was him, Shua. With a step, Li Siji vanished from sight. After several breaths of time, Seamless Saint opened his eyes. As he saw Li Siji emerge from the blood-red light, his pupils shrank before he composed himself. Besides them, there was actually someone else on the ship, so the calmness that Seamless Saint revealed at this time was mostly a disguise. This person could clearly continue to hide on the ship and be the fisherman that reaped the benefits, so why would he reveal himself on his own initiative? It was unclear, but from the looks of it, there didn't seem to be any malicious intent. Seamless Saint took a deep breath and cupped his hands together. "I wonder who you are, and what business do you have with me?" Li Siji said, "I came here to find Seamless Saint because I want to join forces with you to kill Yao Tao and the people around her." After a brief pause, he continued, "As long as you agree to help me do this, I will do my best to help you achieve your wish." Yao Tao, virtuous 9 lives. Seamless Saint frowned. Not to mention that these 2 people weren't easy to deal with. Even if he had some confidence, he still wouldn't agree. To put it simply, who the hell are you? You suddenly appeared out of nowhere and want to cooperate with me. You even want to help me achieve my wish? Are you trying to be funny? If I really agree to join forces with you, then there must be a hole in my brain. After a brief silence, Seamless Saint said, "My apologies. I have no intention of harming you, nor do I want to cause any trouble. So, there is no need to mention the matter of joining forces." Of course, this was because Li Siji's aura was strange and unpredictable, so there was a euphemistic way of putting it. To put it more bluntly, it was to hurry up and get the hell out of here. Li Siji probably felt the true attitude of the Seamless Saint. A gloomy look appeared in his eyes. He laughed coldly in a low voice. "What do you think the others will think if they know that you are a ghost path powerhouse who has hidden himself well?" Shua. Seamless Saint fiercely looked up, his eyebrows furrowed together, killing intent flashing in his eyes. Chapter 1386. What are you talking about? I don't understand. The corners of Li Siji's mouth curled up slightly. Since the sage doesn't understand, I'll explain it more clearly. A ghost Dao expert who cultivates in the slaughter and soul-snatching mystic technique painstakingly hides his true identity and mingles with a group of cultivators. Do you think they will immediately turn hostile if they find out? Bang! The blood-red color instantly exploded, sending out boundless shockwaves. Li Siji's figure flashed and disappeared. In the next instant, he appeared outside of the shockwaves. The smile on his lips grew wider. Does the Seamless Saint want to silence me? You can try, but I advise you not to waste your energy. Seamless Saint's expression was extremely gloomy. His eyes locked onto Feng Lin. Are you threatening me? Li Siji clapped his hands and laughed. That's right. The sage is indeed smart. His laughter faded and an icy cold voice squeezed out from between his teeth. Agree to join hands with me. Otherwise, prepare to be hunted down by everyone. The seamless saint was silent. His eyes flashed brilliantly, and a powerful aura surged around him. It was as if he could unleash an earth-shattering attack at any time. Li Siji sneered and said nothing. After a long time, the Avicii saint took a deep breath, and the ruthlessness around him was completely restrained. He slowly said, I am very curious. How did you know my identity? This sentence was equivalent to admitting the fact that he was indeed an expert of the ghost Tao. Li Siji said, That's not important. What's important is that the sage has agreed to join forces with me. The seamless saint was expressionless. Yao Tao and Xian Jiuxing are both very strong. It won't be easy to deal with them. Li Siji said, If it's easy to kill them, I'll just do it myself. There's no need to seek help from the saints. Seamless Saint asked, What do you want to do? Li Siji licked his lips. Why don't I join forces with the sage and try to make a puppet first? At that time, I'll be able to deal with Yao Tao and Xian Jiuxing. That way, I'll have a higher chance of winning. The eyes of the seamless sage flickered. You want to target the other true sages? I advise you to give up. None of the people who travel with me are easy to deal with. Even if you and I join forces, we might not be able to win. More importantly, we're all on the same ship. If we fight and damage the ship, we'll all be in trouble. So no matter what we do, we can't do it now. At the very least, we have to wait until the ship passes through the super explosive space turbulence and arrives at the blazing mountain. Li Siji frowned. Seamless Saint asked, Is there a problem? Humph. Since that's the case, I'll make my move after I disembark. Li Siji turned around and left. When the time comes, I'll naturally appear. After seeing him off, the seamless saint focused his senses and sensed the surroundings. However, he did not detect anything out of the ordinary. The seamless saint's countenance immediately turned ashen, and a ruthless killing intent gushed out from the depths of his eyes. His identity as a ghost cultivator was his greatest secret. Anyone who knew about this had already become a corpse. How did this person find out? Yao Tao woke up. After falling into a deep sleep, as if she had replenished her energy, her complexion became ruddy once more. She looked at Qinyu and couldn't help but smile. You can't do anything to me, right? Humph, I told you long ago, I'm like a peach girl everywhere. Why don't you consider abandoning that sickly invalid? As long as you agree to be with me, I can promise you anything. Really, you can do whatever you want. I will make you very happy. As she said that, she threw an extremely charming look at him. Qinyu stuffily coughed. He thought that this woman was much more adorable when she was asleep. She had just woken up and was already acting crazy. He turned his head and asked, What happened just now? He already wanted to ask, but Yao Tao had fainted far too quickly. There was no chance at all. Yao Tao blinked. You care about me? Qinyu clenched his teeth. Yao Tao. Humph. What a coward. He doesn't even dare to admit it. Yao Tao muttered to herself. Then she coughed. There's a very fierce fellow on this ship. Even the second personality wasn't able to catch him, so he must be quite strong. In the beginning, the little fellow who pulled me into the dream with ill intentions was just a test. This fellow is quite smart. If he directly bumped into me, the second personality would have already taught him a lesson. Now that he has run away, there might be more trouble in the future. A woman's keen sixth sense tells me that he absolutely won't give up. Qinyu frowned. Although Yao Tao's words were incoherent, the meaning was clear. In other words, things weren't over yet, and there would definitely be more problems. This woman Yao Tao, she was truly a great trouble. If there was a choice, Qinyu would be disinclined to bother with her and let her fend for herself. But in this situation, he could only grit his teeth and accept it. But what happened next was a bit different from what Qin imagined. It was very quiet. In the following voyage, there were no more ghosts or wraiths attacking them. This was a far cry from what Yao Tao had expected. Impossible, this is impossible. I can clearly smell the aura of greed from him, even from 100 walls away. There's no movement at all. Did he run away in fear? This fellow's courage is far too small. It doesn't match his size at all. Yao Tao was indignant, a bit of disappointment on her face. Qin Yu ignored this. He didn't care what Yao Tao was thinking. As long as he could safely pass through this, that was naturally a good thing for him. Suddenly, the blood-red color that filled the interior of the ship began to rapidly recede like a tide. The ship's faint trembling also disappeared. In the next moment, an incomparably hot aura descended. It was like a flame was burning. It traveled down his nose and mouth, entering his trachea and lungs, bringing with it a burning pain. Qin Yu looked up, a look of joy on his face. Without a doubt, the ship had passed through the super-violent space turbulence and arrived at the volcano. Go! With a low growl, he grabbed Yao Tao, turned around and dashed out. Rumble, rumble. There was a low and deep roar, like an astonishingly thick pool of turbid water. As it raced through the river, it gave off an endlessly oppressive feeling. This came from the super-explosive turbulence of space behind him. Standing within it and looking out, it seemed much quieter than the outside world. But with just a glance, Qin Yu could determine that this was only an illusion that appeared after it had gone berserk to a certain limit. With Qin Yu's current cultivation and the intensity of his mortal body, he didn't have the slightest confidence that he could stay here, much less forcefully break through. Here, he had to thank the Western Wilds and that race once more for refining the ship without any hesitation. Looking up, the blazing flames reflected off his face. The burning aura that filled the air came from these flames. Inextinguishable flames. The furnace was excited beyond belief. The feeling it gave Qin Yu was like a bull in heat, staring at a herd of plump and moist heifers, its eyes red. But now wasn't the time. If the furnace was discovered by those old true saints, there would definitely be problems. After expending a great deal of strength and with the help of the array spirit version of the fire spirit, Qin Yu was just barely able to suppress the furnace's crazy actions. Calm down, old iron, that's right. Once those old fellows leave, there will be plenty of time for you to eat to your heart's content. There's no need to be in such a hurry. Qin Yu looked back at the turbulent space turbulence. When he turned to look at the volcano, the other passengers on the ship also appeared. Without exception, there was a burning heat in the depths of everyone's eyes. After the Western Wilds and that race arrived at the soulless land without any hesitation, they had painstakingly searched for countless years. Perhaps it was right in front of them in this volcano. At this time, wasting time was shameful. Moreover, if they left a step ahead, they would have the advantage. Perhaps this sliver of speed would have a decisive effect on the final outcome. The Su family brothers didn't even say a word. They swept their eyes over everyone and then rushed towards the volcano. The three true saints revealed a dignified expression. They cupped their hands together and said, "We will also go first." Whoosh! They turned and left, submerging into the volcano in the blink of an eye. Seamless Saint smiled. After suffering for so many years, I have finally waited for this day. The various saints are so impatient, I apologize for making a fool of myself in front of you. Qin Yu had a calm expression. This is human nature, I can understand. But is Seamless Saint not in a hurry? Where did he find the mood to speak nonsense here? He needed to hurry up and do what he needed to do. He couldn't hold down the furnace any longer. Seamless Saint lightly said, "Lucky chances are determined by the heavens. What belongs to me is mine. Whether I go earlier or later, the result will not change." He cupped his hands together. "You too, I will bid my farewells." Whoosh! His figure instantly flew far away, vanishing in the blazing flames. To dare to directly rush into the volcano and not fear the terrifying heat and the burning attribute of the ever-burning flame. It was clear that these old monsters had already been prepared. As expected, they had already learned of the existence of the ever-burning flame and even the volcano. From the cautiousness displayed by the Western Wilds and that race, it wasn't likely that they had leaked this information. In other words, there was definitely a problem here. But that was another story altogether. Whether or not it was interesting, it had nothing to do with them. Thus, Qin Yu only thought about it for a moment before suppressing it. A sharp light shined in his eyes. The old monsters had all left, so it should be their turn next. The furnace was hungry and couldn't wait any longer. And in truth, the excitement in Qin Yu's heart was no less than that of the furnace. After absorbing the ever-burning flame, the furnace would transform once more and help him forge his path. Disregarding the fact that he could replace the garden master's position and extend Peach Blossom's life, Qin Yu's strength would also greatly increase. Those who walked the true divinity path had finally successfully condensed the true divine Great Tao. He didn't know if this had ever happened before, but his intuition told him that there might be a pleasant surprise waiting for him. Go! With a shout, Qin Yu howled and rushed away. He had already left the ship, and it was impossible to pull Yao Tao along. Although the feeling of her palm was soft and tender, it was still quite good. Cough, cough. Calm down, Qin Yu. Are you too excited? You actually have the mood to think about such things. He subconsciously turned his head and saw that Yao Tao hadn't moved. Qin Yu frowned. Go, I'm not waiting for you. Yao Tao wrinkled her nose. Don't think you can shake me off. As she spoke, she rushed over, but her eyes subconsciously swept over the quiet ship behind her. For some reason, she felt as if someone was looking at her from inside, harboring malicious intentions. Was it that fellow who had been scared away before? It should be right, but if he wasn't willing, why didn't he do anything before? That bastard. Didn't he know that it was an extremely hateful thing to make a girl look forward to him in vain? He really deserved to be chopped into mincemeat. Look, I'm still looking at your legs, you pitiful worm that was chained to the ship. Once I leave, you won't have another chance. Chapter 1387. The furnace was very irritable. It was as if it had rushed over only to be mercilessly rejected by a heifer. Although this description was not very appropriate, it was still very accurate to say that it could only be seen but not eaten, because this was the tragic reality that the furnace was currently facing. The everlasting flame was here. It opened its belly wide and ate. It could clearly feel the high temperature of the flames, but it was like a reflection in the water. In short, all it ate was air. There was no effect at all. It wasn't that 1 or 2 mouthfuls had no effect, but that from the moment it started eating until now, it had not absorbed the slightest bit of the everlasting flame's power. It was like an illusion. Qin Yu frowned and thought for a moment. He removed the defensive power from his hand, and a burnt smell immediately wafted out. Hiss! Yao Tao turned to look at him. Her eyes filled with pity, as if she were a student who was not smart enough. He flung his hand and with great difficulty dispelled the invading burning power. When he turned and saw her expression, Qin Yu was so angry. The furnace was very irritable, but in fact, Qin Yu was even more irritable. Ever since he entered World Zero, how many things had happened here and there. He had poured so much effort into achieving his goal, but the everlasting flame was right in front of him and the furnace could not eat it? Are you kidding me? If it weren't for the fact that his will had been tempered over the years, Qin Yu would have already collapsed. So right now he was in a very bad mood. Not only had all his efforts been for nothing, but he was also unhappy that he had been played. How could this be? Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the irritation in his heart. Calm down, don't panic. The everlasting flame was definitely here. If he could not eat it, there must be some other reason. He had already passed through so many twists and turns. One more step wouldn't make a difference. But before Qin Yu could think of how to find the problem and solve it, trouble had already arrived at his doorstep. Yao Tao was the first to sense it. She looked up with surprise and then excitement. That fellow had actually caught up, although she couldn't figure out how he had broken free from the chains of the ship. That wasn't important. What was important was that she would soon be able to eat a delicious meal. Qin Yu frowned. He looked at Seamless Saint, who had parted the raging flames and was approaching. A trace of gloom appeared in his eyes, although he was very clear that everyone would become competitors after entering the blazing mountain, and once they discovered something, it would be hard to avoid a battle. The Seamless Saint was unfathomably deep. Qin Yu had thought that he might have to fight him, but he never imagined that he would arrive so quickly. It didn't make sense. Erupting a great battle before the situation was clear would only create convenience for others. The Seamless Saint had no reason to do so. If the problem wasn't because of him, then the crux of today's matter must lie with someone else. Qin Yu looked at Li Siji. His exposed flesh and blood was covered in blood-red lines that wove together to form strange patterns. His aura was strange and hard to fathom. There was a majestic life force and a dense death aura. This feeling was somewhat familiar. The stone pagoda suddenly said, "Master, the person who fought with you earlier was this person." Everything in front of him suddenly became clear, and he felt as if he had found the right person. He turned his head to look at Yao Tao, whose face was flushed red and her eyes were bright. She was filled with anticipation and excitement. Damn it, the source of all his troubles really came from this woman. Sinful. Li Siji smiled, his voice cold and sharp. "Yao Tao, we meet again. You definitely didn't expect this." Yao Tao nodded. "You've changed quite a bit. What should I call you now? Western Wasteland's Third Highness, or a blood sacrifice resentment spirit?" As she spoke, she looked up and down, like an Andy shopping in a market. She was very judgmental. Li Siji wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "Just call me Li Siji. A resentment spirit has no name and is a bit too pitiful. All right, if you want to catch up, wait until I swallow you into my stomach. There will be plenty of time to talk while I digest you." He took a step forward and locked his eyes on Qin Yu. "Little boy, you punched me before. In truth, it hurt a bit. Now let's settle the debt." The Seamless Saint's eyes exploded with a sharp light. Yao Tao hadn't spoken much with Li Siji, but she had revealed a great deal. For instance, his name, his origins, as well as the blood sacrifice resentment spirit on the ship. There were many things that he didn't have a clue about before. Thus he was confused. But now that he had obtained the key information, everything became clear. At this moment, as Seamless Saint saw Li Siji rush towards Qin Yu, he was sure that his true goal was Yao Tao. It was just that he had some misgivings about Yao Tao. So he joined forces with her, hoping to borrow her hand to kill someone. Although he was threatened by Li Siji and didn't want to reveal his identity as a ghost cultivator, it wasn't the only reason he agreed to join forces with him. For instance, as a ghost path powerhouse that cultivated the slaughter and soul-stealing technique, every time he killed Powerhouse he would grow stronger. And no matter how one looked at it, Yao Tao and Virtuous Nine Lives were both qualified targets. Thus, they took advantage of the situation and used each other. This was a tacit understanding. Yao Tao was strong. Seamless Saint had seen this with his own eyes. But Virtuous Nine Lives wasn't weak either. In fact, the feeling he gave off was even more terrifying. Thus, Seamless Saint didn't have any objections to Li Siji choosing his opponent first. He cupped his hands together and said, "Today's matter wasn't my intention. I apologize for offending you." Bang! Although he said he was offending her, his actions were ruthless. He punched out, causing space to violently shake and the endless flames to be forced back. Yao Tao chuckled. "It's fine. In any case, I will kill you. Even if you did something wrong, I won't bother with it." She lifted a hand and pointed forwards. Her white and delicate finger seemed completely out of place against the space distortions that swept towards her. It gave off a delicate and weak feeling, as if this finger would be twisted apart by a wild strength in the next moment turning into ash along with her. But the moment this finger fell, Seamless Saint's complexion changed. Surprise appeared in his eyes, and he rapidly retreated. But in the next moment, there was a loud, cracking sound like a mirror or a layer of ice breaking apart. It sounded out in everyone's ears. They saw that in front of Yao Tao, space seemed to freeze over. Everything within seemed to have fallen into an ice seal. At this moment, the ice seal shattered, and everything within was destroyed. This even included the strength of Seamless Saint's punch. If he hadn't retreated in time, he would have been caught up in it as well. After forcing back Seamless Saint with a single finger, the smile on Yao Tao's face widened. "Why are you running? Come, let's have a good exchange." She stepped forwards without the slightest fluctuation of strength. Then, her entire person vanished. The next moment, when he appeared, he was already behind the Avicii Saint. He raised his hand and pressed it down. With a loud bang, the space directly exploded into pieces. The chaos was like a pot of rotten porridge, directly swallowing the Avicii Saint. Bang, bang, violent sounds constantly echoed out from the shattered space. It was like some hard object was continuously colliding with the killing power of space. Darkness appeared from within, like a drop of ink falling into water. It rapidly spread outwards in the blink of an eye. It covered the entire shattered space. Yao Tao's eyebrows arched up. She looked down at her palm. At this time, at the center of her white and delicate palm, there seemed to be a seed of darkness sprouting from the ground. Then vines began to grow outwards. The pitch-black lines carried with them a deep and strange aura that seemed as if they could pull in one's mind. They rapidly covered her entire palm and then extended upwards. "Ghost Path." As she spat out these two words, memories that she didn't want to recall leapt into her mind. Yao Tao's lips curled up in an even wider smile, and the chill in her eyes thickened. Her fingers were like blades, her nails easily cut through flesh. As blood gushed out, Yao Tao grabbed the seed of darkness and pulled it outwards bit by bit. Shrill screams suddenly sounded in her ears. It was as if countless voices were stacked together. There were men and women, young and old, but they were all filled with despair and ruthlessness. They were like the wailing souls of the dead in hell. When the screams entered her ears, it was as if a sharp stake with burrs had been fiercely nailed into one's ear and then emerged from the other, dripping with blood. At the same time, it brought with it an excruciating pain that went straight into her bones and soul. It was as if it wanted to destroy her mind. Yao Tao's face paled. She frowned slightly, but her eyes became even brighter at this moment. She gently licked the corner of her mouth. At this moment, she gave off the feeling that she was enjoying it. "That's right, that's it." She laughed softly and continued to pull the seed of darkness. Bit by bit, she peeled it out of her body. "It's been a long time since I've encountered a cultivator of the ghost path. This is really an unexpected surprise." The shattered space that had been dyed pitch black opened up from within. Seamless Saint stepped out. His eyes locked onto Yao Tao, and his pupils shrank violently. The aura of the ghost path. This woman was actually someone who walked the same path as him. No, they weren't the same. It was more accurate to say that she herself was an incomparably powerful ghost. But she was clearly a living person with a surging and powerful life aura. So how could she possibly possess the strength of a ghost? The seed of darkness and the vines that grew from it had already been mostly pulled out. Yao Tao's eyes became increasingly bright. On the other side, Li Siji also attacked. He had already suffered a loss at Qin Yu's hands and knew that he was extremely strong. Moreover, there was likely some terrifying strength hidden within his body. But this didn't mean that he couldn't attack. There were many ways to kill someone, and Li Siji knew many of them. For instance, shattering the soul. He sneered. He constantly flicked his fingers and flicked out motes of blood. Every mote of blood rapidly expanded, turning into blood-red, resentful spirits. In the blink of an eye, There were 12 of them. They had strange appearances, but what they had in common was that they were cruel and bloodthirsty. At this time, they were scattered around, sealing Chinyu in. Roar, roar, the 12 resentful spirits screeched together. Blood red wildly surged on the surface of their bodies, as if they were blazing crimson flames. Threads as thin as spider silk emerged from the blood flames and rapidly grew in all directions, quickly connecting with each other. In the blink of an eye, with the 12 resentful spirits as the center, they wove together into a blood egg that wrapped around Chinyu, as if it had some sort of amplifying effect. After Chinyu was wrapped up by the blood egg, the screams of the resentful spirits instantly increased by dozens of times, or even more. At the same time, the negative emotions contained within these screams also rose up. It was deep, like the arrival of an eternal night, submerging everything. It was incomparably dark, without the least bit of light or hope. The so-called shattering soul wasn't a direct attack to crush the other's soul. Rather, it was to drown them in negative emotions, crushing their will and mind. In a state of losing control, they would fall into endless despair or fear. Finally, they would choose to destroy their own soul, freeing themselves with death. In simpler terms, it was to use the interference of emotions to kill themselves. Because of this, even if Chinyu had an extremely formidable strength hidden within his body, suicide wouldn't trigger it. This was also the main reason Li Siji chose this method. As for the effects, as the most powerful, resentful spirit born from blood sacrifices, it had absorbed the negative emotions of countless dead people before they died. Of this he had absolute confidence. And in fact, Li Siji's shattering soul was truly terrifying. Even a true saint-level existence would be affected, unless the egg formed from the interweaving threads of blood was broken. It was only a matter of time before their mind was slowly broken down. And this egg formed from threads of blood had astonishing defensive capabilities. It was nearly impossible to shatter it with a pure eruption of strength. This was because it was an extension of the resentful spirit's strength and was a mysterious strength similar to a curse. Moreover, it was more concentrated on the level of the mind and will. In simpler terms, if one's mind was strong enough, they wouldn't be affected by the shattering soul technique and could break it with a single finger. Otherwise, even if one erupted with the strength of a peak true saint, they still wouldn't be able to damage the egg formed from threads of blood. Chapter 1388. Bang, bang. Deep thumping sounds constantly echoed out. The surface of the blood thread egg rapidly swelled up and fell down. Although it seemed as if it was being fiercely struck, the truth was that it was completely meaningless. Li Siji sneered. He thought that he would continue to waste his strength. The weaker one's will was, the easier it was to break through, and the faster one would die. Things were progressing more smoothly than he had imagined. All he needed to do was wait. Once he killed Chinyu, he would join forces with Seamless Saint to suppress Yao Tao. As for whether or not Seamless Saint would interfere, Li Siji wasn't worried at all. This was because he was already fully prepared. But at this time, if Li Siji could see through the blood thread egg and see what was happening inside, he would discover that things were different from what he had imagined. Chinyu was indeed attacking, but his expression was calm and a sharp light surged in his eyes. There was no anger or fear, no panic or exasperation. Then there was only one explanation. Chinyu wasn't panicking at all. In other words, he was deliberately attacking the blood thread egg for others to see. This person referred to Li Siji, but it wasn't just him. It also referred to Seamless Saint and Yao Tao. Well, to be more precise, Chinyu's main goal was Yao Tao. He wanted to use this matter to determine just how strong she was, what method she had, and what card she had in her hands. Perhaps his actions were a bit despicable, but since it involved the safety of Peach Girl and even Ningling, he had to be cautious. He couldn't allow any mistakes to occur in this matter. Moreover, taking 10,000 steps back, he was still a stranger to Yao Tao. There was no reason for him to feel guilty or guilty. So when the blood thread egg condensed, this thought flashed through Qin Yu's mind, leading to his current actions. The soul-shattering technique was terrifying, but to Qin Yu, who had tempered his heart, it wasn't anything at all. His will was incomparably firm, and he wouldn't be shaken by the outside world in the least. In addition, there was also the existence of the stone pagoda. Qin Yu was truly curious. Just what did this fellow eat while growing up? Or just what did it experience? It seemed as if there was nothing it couldn't do. For instance, the horrifying negative emotions contained in these screams were like delicious snacks to the stone pagoda. It would eat as much as it wanted. In this relaxed state, Qin Yu estimated that the stone pagoda could eat for several days and nights without a problem. "Master, are you not worried that there might be a problem with Yao Tao?" The stone pagoda's voice sounded out. "Although I can't be certain of the exact relationship between her and Peach Girl, for a soul seed avatar to be this strong will inevitably have an impact on the main body." Qin Yu said, "I know what you mean. If there is a problem with the heavenly peaches, then Peach Girl might be implicated. It is because of this that I have chosen to endure it all this time. Since I can't attack Yao Tao directly, I can only use other methods to investigate the secrets hidden on her and the actual situation. Now is the best opportunity." There was also something that Qin Yu didn't mention. He didn't believe that the Seamless Saint could truly deal fatal damage to Yao Tao. This woman acted crazy in front of him, no different from a love-struck fool. But in reality, how could a woman who could force back a descending quasi-emperor of that clan be a weakling? She was very strong, stronger than what everyone saw in front of them. This was also an important reason why Qin Yu urgently wanted to see Yao Tao's true strength. Only by knowing yourself and knowing your enemy could you have a clear plan. Subconsciously, Qin Yu was well aware that as long as Yao Tao had designs on Peach Girl, there would be a battle between them sooner or later. Bang, bang. Qin Yu continued to bombard the blood egg. It was just that the frequency of his attacks was much lower than before, and his strength had also been reduced. Since he had decided to put on this play, he naturally had to go all the way. Yao Tao saw all of this as she extracted the darkness seed from her body, her eyebrows imperceptibly furrowed. It wasn't because of the pain she was suffering right now. In this aspect, the pain she suffered when 10,000 ghosts devoured her soul in the past was dozens or even hundreds of times worse than this. Qin, you shouldn't be so weak. At the very least, Yao Tao could sense that he wouldn't be easy to deal with. Li Siji, who had fused together with the blood, sacrifice, resentment spirits on the ship, might have become stronger, but at least he shouldn't have fallen into such a predicament in a single strike. But what she saw in front of her was indeed like this. She couldn't take this risk. As she said before, Yao Tao was certain that Qin Yu had some strength within him that could help her take another step forward. If she could take this step forward, the positions of her main body and avatar might be reversed. It could be said that this was the only goal that Yao Tao had fought for her entire life. She certainly wouldn't allow anything to happen to Qin Yu, even if it was just a possibility. "Come out for me." With a loud shout, Yao Tao forcefully pulled outwards. The final tentacle of the darkness seed was pulled out. Across from her, Seamless Saint stuffily coughed. Because the darkness seed was pulled out, he suffered a backlash. But a sharp light exploded in his eyes. He said, "You are too anxious." Pulling the seed of darkness out of his body wasn't as simple as pulling it out of his body. During this slow process, Yao Tao was also suppressing and disintegrating the darkness seed, destroying it in its current state. Originally, she only needed to continue the previous process and slowly and steadily suppress the darkness seed and deal a heavy blow to Seamless Saint. But she was anxious and quickened her final steps. Although the darkness seed was pulled out of her body, it was still alive. "Pa!" The Seamless Saint snapped his fingers, and the seed of darkness trembled slightly. Following that, it shattered with a kacha sound. What shattered was the darkness seed, but the one injured was Yao Tao. She coughed, her complexion pale. Countless wounds tore open on the surface of her body, all of them dark red and glaring. They were like the open mouths of a child, terrifying to look at. Comparatively speaking, these could only be considered minor wounds. If Yao Tao hadn't been able to force out the darkness seed, and it had drilled into her body, then with a snap of Seamless Saint's fingers, she would have disintegrated into countless pieces. Seamless Saint lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Blood gushed out from these wounds, condensing into a ball in front of him. He took a deep breath, an intoxicated look on his face. He smiled and said, "The taste of this blood is wonderful. I believe that your corpse will be very suitable to be made into a puppet of the ghost path." Yao Tao lifted a hand and pointed between her eyebrows. A dark red that appeared, and all the wounds on her body instantly healed. She glanced at Seamless Saint and then turned towards Li Siji. She lifted a hand and pointed forwards. "Yao Tao, you actually took a liking to this man. For him, you would even disregard yourself." Li Siji laughed, his eyes becoming increasingly cold. Hee, women are indeed irrational. They believe in something as illusory as love. But the more you care about him, the more he will be your weakness. How can I allow you to save him so easily? Li Siji flicked his sleeves. Endless blood-red light erupted, covering her figure like a blood fog. Then, as Li Siji clenched his fingers, the blood fog began to wildly collapse. A terrifying strength recklessly crushed down on her. Bang! The blood fog was smashed apart. Yao Tao flew out. She lifted a hand and touched the blood thread egg. But at this time her complexion changed. Across from her, Li Siji revealed a fierce expression. "Ha ha ha! Yao Tao, you've been fooled." Countless blood threads suddenly appeared on the surface of Yao Tao's body, from shallow to deep. This process happened in the blink of an eye. If one looked carefully, they would discover that the blood threads that appeared on Yao Tao's body were exactly the same as those on Li Siji's body. It was like the moment Yao Tao's finger touched the blood thread egg, it was instantly replicated and appeared on her body. Li Siji's eyes burned with excitement, ice cold, and ruthlessness. His breathing became incomparably heavy. "Now you can't run away." He opened his mouth and took a deep breath. Yao Tao's body trembled. On the surface of her body, the wounds that had just healed began to reappear. But this time, what flowed out from these wounds was no longer dark red blood, but traces of pure white mist. This was the strength of the soul. Or, to be more precise, it was the manifestation of Yao Tao's soul strength. What Li Siji wanted to seize was her soul, a powerful soul body that had withstood the 10,000 ghosts devouring the soul and had instead suffered a backlash. Once he succeeded, Li Siji had absolute confidence he could thoroughly escape the shackles of the ship and welcome a new life. Yao Tao lifted a hand and touched the dark red between her eyebrows once more. It suddenly became even brighter. It gave off the feeling that it was filled with blood, and there was only a thin layer of skin that trembled and wrapped around it, as if it could break at any moment. Although the wounds on her body did not heal this time, there seemed to be an invisible sealing strength that prevented the strength of her soul from leaking out. Li Siji clenched his teeth and took another deep breath. Yao Tao's body trembled even more fiercely, but she still prevented the strength of her soul from leaking out. "Seamless Saint, if you don't act now, when will you?" True Saint Seamless' eyes swept over Yao Tao and then looked at the blood thread egg. A trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes, because the entire process had been far too smooth, so smooth that he hadn't even had time to display all of his preparations. This was far too different from his previous predictions. Whether it was Xian Jiuxing or Yao Tao, neither of them were easy to deal with. True Saint Seamless was well aware of this. Could it really be because Yao Tao had made a mistake after being aroused, causing the situation to collapse and get out of hand? Truthfully speaking, this was indeed a possibility. In his long life, Seamless Saint had seen more than one example of people losing their lives because of carelessness, arrogance, or other reasons. Taking a deep breath, Seamless Saint said in a low voice, "All right, I will lend you a hand." Whether there was a problem or not, he would know once he tried. Stepping down, True Saint Seamless clenched his fist and punched out. Instantly, a sinister wind howled and a sinister, ghost face appeared from within. If there was a problem, he would naturally be able to force it out with his full strength. If there was no problem, he could use this method to kill Yao Tao. As a ghost Dao expert who cultivated the secret killing technique, it was true that he had entered the Flame Mountain to search for the ruler's relic. However, if he failed, he could take the opportunity to kill the other experts, which was also a huge gain. Every time he killed someone, Seamless Saint would become stronger. If he could kill all the other experts in the Flame Mountain today, even if he couldn't obtain the ruler's relic, he was confident that he could rely on his own strength to break through to the ruler realm. So, when it came to killing someone, as long as there was a chance, he would do his best. What if he succeeded? Moreover, you weren't wrong. Li Siji was also on Seamless Saint's kill list. The fusion body of the Western Wasteland's third prince and a blood sacrifice resentment spirit, such a strange and powerful existence, was certainly an excellent choice. As for cooperation, it was just a mutual use of threats. There was no binding power at all. Of course, Seamless Saint was also confident that if there was a chance to kill him, Li Siji wouldn't hesitate. Within the blood thread egg, Qinyu had been closely sensing the entire process. He saw that because Yao Tao was anxious, she had been injured by the darkness seed. He saw that when she tried to save her, she had fallen into Li Siji's trap. Although he was calm and clear-headed and told himself that Yao Tao was destined to be his enemy in the future, if he said he wasn't shaken at all, he would be deceiving himself. If Yao Tao had been tricked by Li Siji and could only bitterly hold on, Qin, you could still coldly look on from the sidelines. But now, he knew that he couldn't remain silent any longer. Yao Tao couldn't be harmed. Also, reason told him that he shouldn't have done this. But deep in his heart, there was indeed a trace of guilt. This was likely his instinct. Bang! With a loud explosion, the blood thread egg exploded into pieces. Qin Yu stepped forwards and punched at Li Siji. He was well aware that the reason Yao Tao was in such a dangerous situation was because of him. If Li Siji was forced back and Yao Tao regained her freedom, Seamless Saint naturally wouldn't be able to harm her. Puff! Li Siji spat out a mouthful of blood. His complexion was fierce. Impossible! How did you escape? With the blood thread egg shattered, it was impossible for him to escape unscathed. In truth, this question was a bit awkward, especially when he looked into Yao Tao's eyes. What was the saying? Adults can see through things, but don't point them out. If you don't have any eyes, then you must be ruthlessly taught a lesson. Qin Yu's attack speed was faster, and the strength of his fist was stronger. Li Siji's face twisted with unwillingness. He could only abandon the prey that was already near his mouth and raise a hand in front of him. Dong! With a deep bang, he was forced backwards and spat out another mouthful of blood. There was a trace of guilt in his heart, as well as a bit of embarrassment and anger. In this situation, Qin Yu wouldn't hold back. Li Siji was forced back by Qin Yu. The blood threads on the surface of Yao Tao's body rapidly faded and her wounds healed. Her figure flickered, avoiding the ghost face that was biting at her. Her eyes fell on Qin Yu, and in the next moment, her eyes paled. Her second personality. Chapter 1389. You're finally willing to make a move? Yao Tao said indifferently. You should feel lucky, otherwise I wouldn't have let you go. Strong and cold. There was no emotion in those pale eyes. There was only coldness and death. Looking up at Li Siji, the second personality stepped down and instantly disappeared. In the next moment, the darkness opened up like a giant mouth and swallowed him. You dare to have ideas about me? Little fellow, you're quite bold. Since you came to me on your own initiative, don't ever leave again. A voice came from the darkness, overflowing with killing intent. Li Siji roared in anger. You impossible! This is impossible! The darkness violently surged. Muffled sounds constantly rang out, as if it was a copy of Qin Yu's experience. The only difference was that Qin Yu had deliberately disguised himself to judge Yao Tao's strength. As for Li Siji, he had likely suffered a great loss and encountered danger in the darkness. Qin Yu, who believed that his acting skills had reached perfection and was worthy of the title of best actor, awkwardly rubbed his nose. He thought to himself, this can't be. How did my near-perfect performance get seen through? However, Yao Tao's second personality was full of ferocity. When she looked at him just now, Qin Yu's heart couldn't help but tremble. Luckily, he didn't come out empty-handed. Yao Tao was very strong, but in her second personality state, she could erupt with even greater strength. He needed to observe further. Seamless Saint attacked, punching the surging darkness. He didn't necessarily want to save Li Siji. After all, if there was a chance, these two people would kill each other without hesitation. But now was different. Seamless Saint's attack today meant that he was standing opposite to Yao Tao. There was no possibility of reconciliation between the two sides. If he watched helplessly as Yao Tao killed Li Siji and swallowed him, her strength would inevitably increase. This was the same as increasing the danger to himself. Saving Li Siji was equivalent to saving himself. He could still distinguish this point, so he acted decisively without the slightest bit of hesitation. Qin Yu's eyes flashed with hesitation. Seamless Saint didn't want to see Yao Tao kill and then swallow Li Siji. He didn't want to either. The reason was simple. The stronger Yao Tao was, the more danger Peach Girl would be in. But this hesitation only existed for a breath of time before it was suppressed. He moved and stood in front of Seamless Saint. Yao Tao's second personality had already warned him that if Qin Yu tried anything funny, it was likely that the two of them would break apart. Being in the mountain of flames, the situation today was naturally the worst. A crazy woman was the most terrifying, and this sort of horror was not something Qin Yu wanted to withstand. As for Li Siji, he was the third prince of the Western Wilderness, and he was also a vengeful spirit of the ship. With these two titles, he shouldn't be eaten by Yao Tao so easily, right? As for why Qin Yu knew what Yao Tao was thinking after reading her memories, he learned that Yao Tao had experienced the 10,000 ghosts devouring soul and finally completed the backlash. In addition to the excitement and anticipation she revealed, if Qin Yu still couldn't guess what Yao Tao was thinking, he might as well buy a piece of tofu and kill himself. Get out of the way! The Seamless Saint bellowed. He raised his hand and punched out. This punch had nothing to do with the power of the ghost Tao. It was an upright punch that displayed the demeanor of a peak true divine. For so many years, the Seamless Sage was able to conceal his identity as a ghost cultivator perfectly. But without a doubt, his greatest strength still came from his ghost Tao cultivation. At this moment, he didn't use it. It could be understood that he was being cautious. He was reserving his strength to deal with any unexpected changes in the situation. But it could also be understood that the Seamless Sage was watching. Or more accurately, he was waiting for an opportunity. For example, Yao Tao and Li Siji. Both of them were fighting to the death, and in the end, both of them were injured. Naturally, he would have the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. If he could kill both Yao Tao and Li Siji, his strength would definitely skyrocket. At that time, only Xian Zhouxing would be left, and he could easily kill him. Although the chances weren't too high, compared to the expected benefits, it was completely worth the gamble. It would naturally be best if Li Siji was strong. If he was really useless, then it wouldn't be too late to save him. As for Xian Zhouxing in front of him, to be honest, he was afraid of him. But if he attacked as a ghost Tao cultivator, the Seamless Sage still had the confidence to defeat him. This was the confidence of a ghost Tao powerhouse when facing an enemy. If not for this, Ghost Tao cultivators would not have become a terrifying existence that would cause people to pale at the mere mention of their names. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He could somewhat guess what the seamless sage was thinking. He inwardly mocked that this world was filled with schemes. But he wasn't innocent and didn't have the moral high ground to stand on. His thoughts raced. Qin Yu punched out his fist. Since the seamless sage was planning to wait, then everyone would wait and see. As for using his full strength to defeat the seamless sage and then turning around to help Yao Tao kill Li Siji, well, that sort of hot-blooded story wouldn't appear on the current Qin Yu. He had long since passed the age where he would disregard everything because of a moment of impulse. Everything had to be turned over in his heart first, and then he would make a decision after some consideration. Perhaps this could be called the sorrow of an adult, or perhaps it could be called reality. In the darkness, Li Siji screamed again and again. It was a truly pitiful cry. Just listening to it made one's scalp tingle and their hairs stand on end. It was unknown just what he was experiencing right now. But as one listened to his pitiful screams, a series of words involuntarily popped up in one's mind. For instance, flay his skin and pull out his tendons, grind his bones to ashes, extract his soul and refine it, and so on and so forth. It was clear that either his acting skills were superb to the point where he could rely on his voice alone to make one feel as if they were on the scene, or he was really being pressed against the ground by someone right now. Qin Yu judged it to be the latter. As he looked at the surging darkness, the image of Yao Tao's second personality's pale eyes subconsciously appeared in his mind. Hiss! A chill gushed out from the depths of his heart. He felt as if he had fallen into an ancient cave of ice. Because he had decided to put on an act, he hadn't truly fought with Li Siji. But his aura couldn't be wrong. His strength was truly terrifying. Even such a terrifying Li Siji had been directly swallowed up by the darkness summoned by Yao Tao's second personality, resulting in the current situation. Qin Yu had a clearer and clearer understanding of just how terrifying she was. The seamless sage frowned, a gloomy look in his eyes. What bullshit Western wasteland, third prince. There was also that resentful spirit on the ship. These two trash were actually unable to defeat a single woman. He couldn't help but feel a bit angry that his best result had failed. But even if he was angry, he still had to act. If this continued, Li Siji really might be killed. At that time, he would be in trouble. Soul, come! The seamless sage shouted out loud. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. The flesh and blood on his fingers rotted away, turning into a viscous liquid that dripped to the ground. His white bones seemed to latch onto some door and forcefully pull outwards. Bang! Black shadows held out from nothingness. There were countless of them, and in the blink of an eye, they filled the entire field of vision. Woo-woo! Gusts of chilling wind howled. The temperature in the air began to rapidly fall. The source of this bone-chilling cold was the black shadows that flew out from nothingness. Pairs of blood-red eyes locked onto the seamless sage, filled with cruelty and hatred. Humph! The seamless sage coldly coughed. All the black shadows cried out miserably. Their blood-red eyes became even more cruel and filled with hatred. They turned and hurtled towards Qin Yu. Drag him back and treat him as your food. Woo-woo! The chilling wind suddenly rose. The blood-red eyes erupted with an even stronger ice-cold aura. Not only did it target the flesh and blood, but it also affected the soul and consciousness. Beneath the cold, the speed of one's thoughts rapidly slowed down and the soul nearly froze. It was impossible for one to effectively resist. Every black shadow that flew out from nothingness was the seamless sage's ghost path puppets. The hatred and cruelty in their hearts were the source of their strength. But their life and death depended on a single thought of the seamless sage. There was no way for them to resist. The more time passed, the more negative emotions accumulated in the bodies of the ghost path puppets, and the stronger the seamless sage became. This was the terrifying aspect of a ghost path cultivator. Not only could they wantonly slaughter others to rapidly increase their cultivation. Moreover, as time passed, the longer they lived, the stronger they became. As one of the ancient true saints, the seamless sage had existed for countless years. In addition to the countless ghost path puppets here, the terror of his strength could be imagined. But Qin Yu wasn't afraid. It wasn't just because of the existence of the stone pagoda, but because he discovered that the sun and moon force field around his soul had an unexpected effect on these ghost path puppets. In simpler terms, when an orbital puppet broke through Qin Yu's mortal body and broke into his body to bring his soul home, pa! With a light sound, the ghost path puppet was cleanly broken apart. Then there was nothing else. Woo! But it wasn't that there wasn't a follow-up. After the ghost path puppet was crushed apart, it released endless negative emotions as well as some extremely cold yin strength. To the soul, these two things could be regarded as fatal poisons. But what was good was that these two things were excellent supplements for the stone pagoda. It didn't refuse either of them. They were both delicious and delicious. This was called crunching and crunching. In the end, all that was left over was the pure soul strength contained within the ghost path puppet. After being killed by a ghost path cultivator, the remnant soul would be refined into a ghost path puppet. All that remained would be a remnant instinct. Pain, despair, and cruelty would constantly assault the puppet. It was like a tempering process, polishing the remnant soul countless times inside and out. Perhaps it was less than 1% of its original size, but its quality had risen by several levels. Simply put, every time a ghost path puppet was destroyed, Qin Yu could obtain a piece that was a supreme treasure to the soul. From the perspective of the soul, it was a white and pure irregular polygon. It was like snowflakes falling down. When it touched the soul, it was instantly absorbed and released bursts of warmth. During this process, Qin Yu could clearly feel his soul rapidly improving. It was somewhat similar to the experience when he achieved large success in his body of laws and his mortal body nourished his soul. Although it wasn't as intense as the strengthening of his body of laws, and the speed of improvement was astonishing, the number today was nearly endless. Thus pa, pa, pa. The sounds of shattering rang out incessantly. The orbital puppets that rushed into Qin Yu's body never returned. Seamless Saint frowned. A gloomy light appeared in his eyes. He was well aware of the state of his own ghost path puppets. They were quickly consumed. Almost as soon as they entered Xian Jiuxing's body, they were directly suppressed and killed. No wonder he felt so much dread when facing this person. It was likely because of this. But soon, Seamless Saint's brows relaxed. His lips curled up in a sneer. He had lived for far too long, so he had many things like ghost path puppets. If you want to kill, then do it. I want to see just how long you can keep killing for. Every time a ghost path puppet was killed, the soul annihilation power contained within would be released. In addition to the accumulated negative emotions, with these two added together, even the soul of a peak true saint wouldn't be able to last for too long. So in Seamless Saint's eyes, Qin Yu's actions of massacring the ghost path puppets were no different from a slow suicide. Of course, if Qin Yu could last until all his ghost path puppets were killed and his soul was restored, then he would have one. But did such a possibility exist? I, true Saint Seamless Saint, will tell you as a senior ghost path elder that it is impossible. Kill, kill, kill. As long as he could kill Qin Yu in the end, true Saint Seamless Saint would have profited. They were only ordinary ghost path puppets. How could they compare with the soul of a peak true saint? If he could be a step ahead and swallow Xian Jiuxing's soul, then he might have a chance to turn around and deal with Yao Tao and Li Siji. So, what they were comparing now was who was faster. A sharp light exploded in his eyes. True Saint Seamless Saint's thoughts stirred. More ghost path puppets surged out from the void door, crazily rushing into Qin Yu's body. Hurry! 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 Kill! The more you kill, the better. As for Qinyu, he easily fulfilled true seamless saint's wish. The sun and moon force field around his soul sped up, instantly crushing all the ghost path puppets that intruded into dregs. It was like an incomparably massive millstone of destruction, recklessly harvesting everything. Li Siji's resentful spirit panicked. He discovered that he had underestimated the strength that Yao Tao possessed. In particular, this strange second personality that had appeared from who knew where. It was simply terrifying. The darkness was like a purgatory. He and Yao Tao were both within, so it wasn't just him who suffered the pain. Yao Tao was no different. Or, it was more accurate to say that Yao Tao had forcefully dragged Li Siji within, forcing him to undergo a baptism of darkness. The so-called feeling of a baptism was like a rain of knives raining down from the heavens. It wasn't a chilling cold that pierced through one's heart, but layer upon layer, slicing off one's flesh and blood. This sort of feeling. If the degree of pain was multiplied by 100, it would be about the same. Li Siji might not have suffered too much, but this resentful spirit was different. He was a product of the blood sacrifice and had inherited all the negative emotions of those who died tragically, as well as those painful memories. Even so, he still found it hard to bear. He could only howl and howl to vent the fear in his heart. That's right, it was fear. Li Siji's resentful spirit was afraid. If Yao Tao could withstand more pain than he could, then that was fine. But the key point was that she was actually enjoying herself. That's right, Li Siji and the resentful spirit could swear that they weren't mistaken. She was indeed enjoying herself. Madman, freak, demon. Li Siji's resentful spirit discovered to his dismay that choosing Yao Tao as prey was an extremely stupid decision. Remorse was necessary. If he could change this, he would not hesitate to give himself dozens of resounding slaps. However, it was obvious that no matter if it was regret or a slap, it would not be of any help to the current situation. Escape he had to escape. If he continued to stay here, he would definitely be toyed to death. And this moment was not far away. Li Siji's resentful spirit hesitated. He still had a trump card that could allow him to escape after using it, but the price to do so was too great. Perhaps he could wait a little longer. Wait for the Avicii saint to defeat Xian Jiuxing, and then help him escape from here. Damn it, you useless thing. You can't even deal with a mere true saint. Hurry up and kill Xian Jiuxing, and come save me. But Li Siji's resentful spirit did not expect that while he was waiting for the Avicii saint to rescue him, the latter had sunk into self-doubt and denial. Is my ghost path puppet not strong? No, very strong, one of the strongest in the world. Isn't the power of destroying souls and the impact of negative emotions terrifying? No, very terrifying, one of the most terrifying in the world. Hasn't Xian Jiuxing killed enough ghost path puppets? No, very many, one of the most powerful in the world. So many that I feel heartache. But why isn't he dead yet? Or, to be more precise, not only is he not dead, even his aura has not changed. The Avicii saint suddenly felt that the ghost path secret technique that he was extremely familiar with had suddenly become very unfamiliar, because reality had subverted his understanding. It even made him have an absurd and extremely terrifying thought. Even if all the ghost path puppets were killed, Xian Jiuxing could still continue to be alive and kicking in front of him. The moment this thought appeared, the Avicii saint was completely dumbfounded. On one hand, he felt that this was impossible, and on the other hand, he felt a chill that made his entire body numb. Chapter 1390. The stone pagoda coughed again, coughed a third time. Finally, with great difficulty, Qinyu, who had absorbed the remnant soul essence of the ghost path puppets, awoke from his intoxicated state of enjoyment. Master, although I know that disturbing you right now is not a pleasant matter, if you don't give me a response, I fear Seamless Saint will run away in fright. Qinyu felt a trace of embarrassment in his heart. He thought that this was a bit shameful. He had always been talking about the basic qualities of an actor. He even needed the stone pagoda to remind him. Indeed, one couldn't be arrogant and complacent. One had to maintain a cautious and humble heart. As he thought about how Yao Tao had seen through him, this thought became even firmer. In Qin Yu's eyes, Seamless Saint was a noble person who burned his own ego to warm others. He always liked to be friends with this sort of person, so he certainly couldn't scare him away. Soon, the anxious Seamless Saint, who began to doubt his own cultivation, let out a long breath. I knew it, I knew it. As a grand ghost path master, my methods are still sharp and effective. At most, virtuous Juxing might have some hidden cards in his hand and be able to hold on for a bit longer. Humph. I've killed enough ghost path puppets, and I've finally reached the limit of what I can bear. Suffer, howl in grief. In the following period of time, you will be able to carefully experience how foolish it is to anger a ghost Dao big shot. That's right, Seamless Saint was extremely angry right now. Of course, underneath his anger was also shame and indignation. He had almost been scared away by virtuous Juxing. He even began to doubt the ghost path secret arts he had cultivated his entire life. Shame. This was absolute shame. And this shame could only be washed away bit by bit with the other party's blood and the pained howls of his soul. Bang! From the void gate, more ghost path puppets rushed out, submerging Qin Yu within. Li Siji finally saw hope. Virtuous Juxing couldn't hold on much longer, and Seamless Saint would soon be able to help him. Luckily, his will was firm and his heart was incomparably strong. He was able to forcefully endure the torment of fear and pain. Endure. As long as Seamless Saint helped him, he would be able to survive. Then, there was a particularly long wait. Virtuous Juxing's aura weakened. Weakened again. He was even weaker now. In the end, it was like a candle flame that was about to burn out, and all kinds of cold wind blew in all directions. However, no matter how the cold wind blew, Xian Jiuxing's aura was not extinguished. Li Siji gritted his teeth and cursed inwardly. Are you a roly-poly? He really couldn't hold on any longer. If he didn't escape now, he might not even have the chance to use his trump card. Damn you, Xian Jiuxing, hurry up and die. There was also the useless Seamless Saint. He only had half a breath left. Couldn't he just kill him in one go? Bastard, what are you waiting for? Seamless Saint did not wait for anything. Right now he was also in a dumbfounded state. Virtuous Jiuxing's aura had already weakened to the extent that he would shatter with a single breath. However, this one breath had already devoured hundreds of his orbital puppets. Even so, it was not the end. He was still stubbornly holding on. This guy must have been a cockroach spirit in his previous life. Before this, our ghost path's big shot, Seamless Saint, had proudly declared that he had many ghost path puppets. And this was indeed the case. But no matter how rich he was, he still couldn't withstand such a degree of loss today. Just how many of his ghost path puppets had been destroyed? The specific number was so many that Seamless Saint could no longer remember. The accumulated soul-extinguishing power and negative emotions could even thoroughly extinguish the soul of a peak true saint several times over. But Xian Jiuxing was still alive. Although it was extremely difficult, it gave off a feeling that he could take his last breath at any moment. The current Seamless Saint was in a dilemma. He was about to kill Qin Yu, so he was naturally unwilling to give up. But if he continued, with his tenacious attribute, who knew how long he would have to last? And most importantly, Seamless Saint's endless supply of ghost path puppets was nearly at its end. If he were to use up all of his ghost path puppets in the end and still fail to kill Xian Jiuxing, just thinking about this result was unacceptable. In the fiercely struggling darkness, Li Siji screamed, Seamless Saint, this person is about to die. As long as you erupt with power one more time, you can definitely kill him. You bastard. Hurry up and do it. I can't hold on any longer. Ao. Li Siji miserably howled. In order to send out these words, he suffered several more cuts. Intense pain attacked his mind. His consciousness was dizzy, and he nearly collapsed If this continued, he would really be finished. Seamless. Risking his life, Lisiji roared again. Seamless Saint clenched his teeth and stepped forward. Go, kill him for me. Bang, the void violently shook. The invisible door expanded outwards. More and more ghost path puppets rushed out like a raging river. Under Seamless Saint's coercion, they were like a raging river, instantly rushing into Qin Yu's body. Gather the last of his strength. Finish this battle in one go. Make a final gamble. Seamless Saint's body tensed. He stubbornly stared at Qin Yu. Success, he had to succeed. Finally, under his nervous anticipation, despair, and confusion, Qin Yu's extremely weak aura trembled several times before bursting and dissipating like a bubble. Dead. Ha 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 ha, he had finally been killed. At this moment, Seamless Saint's pale face flushed red. He violently coughed and waved his fists. Indeed, perseverance was victory. Today he, the big boss of the Ghost Path, had the last laugh. He had exhausted all of the Ghost Path puppets, but that didn't matter. Well, to be honest, he did feel his heart ache. So much so that he twitched. Ever since he stepped onto the Ghost Path, he had cultivated for a long period of time. This was the foundation and wealth that he had accumulated throughout his life. Now it was all ruined. Disregarding everything else, just the overall strength of Seamless Saint would be reduced by 30% or more. But that didn't matter. Only with effort would there be gains. Since he was able to destroy all the Ghost Path puppets, Seamless Saint believed that the things on Virtuous Nine Life's body would not disappoint him. Moreover, there was a peak true Saint soul, perhaps even an even stronger one, as compensation. Seamless Saint licked his lips. The urgency in his heart was incomparably intense. He took a step forward and instantly appeared beside Qin Yu. Without any hesitation, his hand that had melted away his flesh and bones reached out to grab Qin Yu's head. At this moment, Seamless Saint's eyes shined with excitement. He was like a farmer who had worked hard for an entire year and finally had a good harvest. But no matter what, he never imagined that after paying so much, what he would reap in the end would be an extremely cold and merciless fist coming towards him. Seamless Saint was stunned. His first reaction was that this was impossible. Then there was no then, because before he could form a second thought, that fist had already arrived. Bang! There was a dull explosion, as if a mountain-sized stone hammer had been lifted and smashed into one's chest. Just from the sound alone, one could tell that it was an extremely painful feeling. Seamless Saint spat out a mouthful of blood and his vision darkened. Seamless Saint was like a ragged sack as he was sent flying away. An old monster that had lived for countless years naturally had an incomparably strong heart. After experiencing such great ups and downs, the Seamless Saint actually managed to regain his composure before he even landed on the ground. He had been tricked. This was already obvious. 9 Lives Virtuous was completely fine. What he saw was weak and frail and frail and frail and frail, but that was nothing more than a wonderful performance. The purpose of this performance was to entice him into releasing more Ghost Path puppets. With this as the starting point, it wasn't hard to guess that those destroyed Ghost Path puppets had been eaten by Qin Yu. Puff! Seamless Saint spat out another mouthful of blood. He glared at Qin Yu, the hatred and pain in his eyes nearly condensing into essence. This had nothing to do with how shrewd he was or how strong his will was. He had accumulated his entire life's worth of wealth, yet he had been tricked into such a pitiful state and eaten clean. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to withstand this. Seamless Saint only spat out a mouthful of blood that was already a very light punishment. Qin Yu retracted his fist and opened his eyes. He cupped his hands together and said, "Many thanks for your help, Seamless Saint. I will accept your Ghost Path puppets." This was probably what it meant to infuriate someone to death. Seamless Saint's lips trembled, his fingers shivered, and his entire body shook. He glared at Qin Yu, as if he wanted to brand this face into his mind. But If Seamless Saint were to learn that the face he saw now was also fake, he feared he would continue to spit out blood. Good, very good. I have wandered the world for countless years, but this is the first time I have suffered such a loss. He took a deep breath, his voice filled with endless hatred. 9 lives virtuous, regardless of whether this name is real or not. I have already remembered your face and remembered your aura. I swear that I will kill you with the most cruel and terrifying methods of the ghost path. Whoosh, he turned and left. At this moment, Seamless Saint displayed the decisiveness of an old monster. Even after suffering such a great loss, he could still leave as he pleased. In this aspect alone, no one could compare with him. A cold light exploded in Qin Yu's eyes. He certainly understood the principle of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. No one wanted to be remembered by others, especially a terrifying old monster like Seamless Saint. Take advantage of his weakness to take his life. The current Seamless Saint was undoubtedly in his weakest state. How could Qin Yu allow him to leave like this? Saying such ruthless words was a waste of time. Thus, Qin Yu didn't say anything. He took a step forwards and held out in pursuit. In the darkness, Li Siji's resentful spirit had a look of despair. Because this name was too long, he could only use it occasionally. He suddenly discovered that all his hopes and perseverance were meaningless. 9 lives virtuous. This person was too terrifying, too sinister. He had schemed against Seamless Saint and caused him to lose so badly that he was left with nothing but his underwear. This had also caused him to suffer a miserable fate. If he had used his trump card to escape before, the price he had to pay would have been greater, but it would have been much better than now. Remorse rose up once more, 100 times stronger than before. But, as he said before, this thing couldn't interfere with reality. Ah! With a loud scream, Li Siji's body exploded. A crack was torn open in the darkness, and a black and red blood fog rushed out. Whoosh! Its speed was astonishing. In the blink of an eye, it vanished from sight. Chapter 1391. Qin Yu frowned, a bit of unwillingness on his face. He ran away. The Seamless Saint was an old monster that had lived for countless years. As expected, he had many strange methods. He originally thought that he could take advantage of this chance to kill off this person, but he never imagined that he would be caught off guard and this person would escape without a trace. When facing an enemy, especially one that was extremely powerful and had been ruthlessly schemed against before, the best choice was to destroy them on the spot. Otherwise, there would be no end of trouble. And now, Qin Yu was in a state of frustration and helplessness. The stone pagoda lightly coughed. In truth, Master doesn't need to be like this. As they say, fortune is always accompanied by disaster, and disaster is always accompanied by good fortune. In this world, who can explain it clearly? If the Seamless Saint ran away, then he ran away. The heavens don't want him to die, perhaps because he hasn't fully contributed himself yet. Perhaps the next time we meet, he will give Master a pleasant surprise. This explanation, fine, it was ruthless enough. He had already been fleeced once. If this happened again, Qin Yu feared that he wouldn't even need to do anything. The Seamless Saint would simply explode from anger. Whatever, he had already run away, so there was no point in thinking about it any further. What if the stone pagoda's words were correct? Qin Yu took a deep breath. He turned his head and looked in the direction he came from, a bit of hesitation in his eyes. If he wanted to get rid of Yao Tao, this was undoubtedly the best chance. Should he leave? After hesitating for less than a second, Qin Yu made his decision. He turned and left in the opposite direction. Yao Tao seemed like a friend and not an enemy, but strictly speaking, this was only an illusion. Once Yao Tao was involved, there would inevitably be a battle. The thing in the mountain of flames was likely a relic of the ruler. If the two of them were together and discovered something, what would they do? If he gave Yao Tao, Qin Yu definitely wouldn't agree, and vice versa. So, since there was a chance to leave, it was best to separate ahead of time and rely on their own methods. The darkness retreated like a tide, finally submerging into Yao Tao's body. She opened her pale eyes and looked in the direction Qin Yu had left. Even though they were separated by an endless distance, she could still feel Qin Yu's movement trajectory. If this was true, then it was truly terrifying. Suddenly, the second personality said, "This is the man you chose? You are far too heartless." After a moment of silence, as if listening to something, the second personality continued, "You can even tolerate this?" After a moment of silence, he said, "Trust me, he won't stand on your side." After a pause, he added, "If he continues to be stubborn, I will kill him." With that said, the second personality closed her eyes. After a few breaths of time, she opened them again. Yao Tao's consciousness had regained control of her body. She gasped for breath, her face extremely pale. She murmured, "You're right, but I still want to try. What if I succeed?" Looking at the direction Qin Yu left in, Yao Tao bit her lips. She took 2 steps back and vanished into the raging flames. Yao Tao did not chase after him. As Qin Yu let out a sigh of relief, he could feel a faint sense of loss in his heart. This discovery caused him to frown and his complexion to turn ugly. Sure enough, the decision to separate from Yao Tao was absolute. In such a short period of time, he had unknowingly been influenced by her. If they continued to stay together for too long, he didn't dare to guarantee whether or not he would be able to persist in his firm resolution. He shook his head, suppressing his tumbling thoughts. Then he looked forwards. "You said that these flames are all fake?" "The stone pagoda said you can't say that. These flames are real, but they also exist somewhere between illusion and reality. They should be some sort of great supernatural ability that uses illusions and reality. I don't understand much in this aspect. That is a method at the ruler level, so I've only heard a little about it. And then, Master, if you want to collect the ever-burning flame, these flames that exist between reality and illusion are useless. You must find its main body." Qin Yu rubbed his temples. "As you can see, there is nothing in front of us but the ever-burning flame. It is the same no matter where you or I sense it. The stone pagoda said, we also have the furnace and the fire spirit." Qin Yu nodded. "You're right, so did you hear me? Now is the time for you to contribute. If you discover anything, hurry up and tell me." Hum! Hum! The furnace trembled, sending out an urgent thought. But this thought was far too urgent. It could only make one feel its eagerness and excitement, nothing else. Qin Yu pressed it down. "All right, calm down first. Tell me about the fire spirit." After a brief silence, a soft voice sounded out. "Yes, Master. A woman." Qin Yu's eyes widened. How come he didn't know that array spirits had genders? The stone pagoda coughed and explained, "It is because of the fire spirit. As for the specifics, I'm not too sure. Cough, cough. In short, I just learned about it not too long ago." He couldn't say that the fire spirit had seen him when he faced Yao Tao and revealed a certain attitude. So it chose to become a woman, right? Qin Yu's temper was good. But the stone pagoda could guarantee that if he really said this fellow would absolutely fall out with him. Did he really think that just because he had a good temper, he didn't care about face? The fire spirit's voice continued. "I can sense the ever-burning flame's main body, but it seems to be in a special state, so I can only sense its general direction." Qin Yu restrained his surprise. It didn't matter if it was a man or a woman. But what could he do to an array spirit? As long as it was useful, it was fine. Where is it? The fire spirit gave him a direction. Shwa! Qin Yu's figure flashed, and he flew straight in that direction. But at this moment, not long after he flew out, his complexion changed. Bang! With a loud explosion, his figure came to a sudden stop. He punched out. A formidable strength recklessly surged outwards, instantly separating the flames and revealing a strange flame creature hidden within. The reason it was called a flame creature was because its entire body was condensed from flames. Its aura was one with the surrounding flames, so it was nearly impossible to sense. It was also because of the fire spirit's warning that Qin Yu was able to discover this flame creature before it could launch a sneak attack. After being struck by Qin Yu's fist, the flame creature cried out miserably and was sent flying away. Before it fell to the ground, its body had already collapsed. But at this moment his heart throbbed. Qin Yu's figure shifted several dozen feet to the side, barely avoiding the incoming flames. He turned his head and saw that the flame creature he had just destroyed had reappeared in perfect condition. Moreover, it was already closing in on him. The fire spirit's voice sounded out. "Master, be careful. This is a strange life form born from flames, and it has a fire crystal core within its body. Only by shattering its crystal core can it be truly killed. Otherwise, as long as it lives in flames, it will be in a nearly indestructible state. Even if it is killed thousands of times, it can still easily revive." Qin Yu said in a low voice, "Get to the point." Shirta's lips curved up in a smile. "Master, where did your tender and protective heart go?" TSK, the fire spirit's voice was so pleasant to hear, but here you are being treated like this. Humph, humph. I wonder if the fire spirit will regret choosing to become a woman. The fire spirit clearly choked. It paused for a moment before saying, "The fire crystal core will appear when the flame creature's body is destroyed, but it will only exist for a short period of time. It will instantly borrow the power of fire to escape. You must be fast enough to catch it." Qin Yu's feet fell and his fist punched out. The flame creature in front of him was directly destroyed. With the fire spirit's warning, he really did sense a strange aura appear the moment the flame creature was destroyed. Fire crystal core. Whoosh! Almost as soon as Qin Yu sensed it, the object's aura vanished. It was indeed fast. Bang! Blazing flames swept towards Qin Yu. The flame creature that had been smashed apart was reborn once more. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes and punched out. The flame creature across from him had a mocking look in its eyes. But this time it was different from before. The moment the flame creature's body was destroyed, the great furnace was summoned. Hum! An invisible imprisoning strength arrived, instantly freezing space and suppressing the fire crystal core. The great furnace released a swallowing strength. It was like someone had opened their mouth and sucked it in. Hum! A tremor spread out from the great furnace. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. His senses hadn't been wrong. This so-called fire crystal core was the true ever-burning flame. There weren't many of them, but at least it proved that their previous guesses weren't wrong. The ever-burning flame's main body was here. Hum! Hum! The great furnace continued to tremble, sending out urgent thoughts. Swallowing this fire crystal core was like opening the valve of hunger. The burning flames in its heart were difficult to suppress. Fire spirit, continue to search for flame creatures. Once you find them, report to me. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. Before he found the true master, this was more or less a comfort. Moreover, if there were enough flame creatures, as long as he had the patience to kill his way through, there would be a considerable harvest. After all, no one knew what the ever-burning flame's main body was like. Whether or not it could be smoothly absorbed was another matter altogether. Qin Yu's intuition told him that this matter wasn't simple. Yes, master. The fire spirit's voice was still gentle and respectful. Reality proved that Qin Yu's decision was correct. Of course, this was also thanks to the formidable probing abilities of the fire spirit. There were many flame creatures in the volcano. As Qin Yu approached the ever-burning flame's main body, more and more of them appeared and they became increasingly strong. Of course, after killing them, the fire crystal cores he obtained also contained more and more ever-burning flame. The great furnace happily ate. The only pity was that the amount was far too little. While it was enjoying the delicious food, it also had to endure an increasingly strong sense of hunger. That taste was just too good. The fire spirit searched for flame creatures. Qin Yu was responsible for attacking, and the Great Furnace was responsible for suppressing them. The three of them had a clear division of labor, and their efficiency was frighteningly high. If it were anyone else here, even if their cultivation was higher than Qin Yu's, it would still be difficult for them to accomplish this so easily. On the contrary, if one couldn't lock onto a flame creature or suppress its fire crystal core, they would instead be dragged down by it. After all, in the volcano, as long as the fire crystal core was intact, they would be undying and indestructible. It might be fine for a short period of time, but once they lost too much strength, they would be in danger. In fact, the flames that these flame creatures spat out were extremely powerful. The reason why they weren't able to reveal any of this power when facing Qin Yu was because they weren't able to cause any harm before they were exterminated by Qin Yu. Perhaps it was because Qin Yu's wanton slaughter had angered a powerful existence in the volcano, and a fire phoenix had attacked him. Although it was essentially a flame creature, the fact that it was able to condense a phoenix body was enough to prove its tyrannical strength. The fire spirit had nearly been deceived by it and hadn't been able to give a warning ahead of time. If it weren't for Qin Yu's quick reaction, he would have suffered a great loss. A fire phoenix that could compare to a true saint and also had formidable attributes within the volcano. Its strength was terrifying to the extreme. If it weren't for the Great Furnace being able to resist the flames and the suppression of the fire spirit, as well as Qin Yu's powerful body of laws, he might have already been burnt to a crisp. This was the greatest crisis Qin Yu had encountered since entering Flame Mountain. It was only after fighting for nearly 2 hours that he finally managed to kill this fire phoenix. Without needing to activate it, the Great Furnace rushed out and suppressed the fire crystal core that had appeared after its death. Hum! Hum! The Great Furnace violently shook, nearly flipping over. It was clear that suppressing this fire crystal core wasn't easy for it. Luckily, it didn't end up being overturned. Qin Yu let out a long breath, fear in his eyes. Luckily, he had the Great Furnace to suppress the fire crystal core. Otherwise, even if he expended all his strength to kill the fire phoenix, it would soon be reborn. Not to mention much. Just 2 or 3 times would be enough to exhaust him to death. Wait. The fire spirit suddenly said. Qin Yu paused for a moment before realizing who it was referring to. Great Furnace, stop! But it was already too late, such a large fire crystal core. Just how many inextinguishable flames did it contain? How could the big cauldron, who was starving and scratching its heart, endure it? Just now it ate it in one gulp. Hearing Qin Yu's order, it blinked its non-existent eyes, giving Qin Yu a puzzled look, as if it were saying, "Why did you call me?" The fire spirit said, "Master, I think this fire crystal core isn't ordinary at all. Perhaps it has some other use." Qin Yu reached out a hand, spit it out. The Great Furnace continued to blink its non-existent eyes. Qin Yu took a deep breath. "Hurry up, I just want to take a look. I'll give it back to you." Perhaps feeling his unyielding attitude and a bit of impatience, the Great Furnace hummed a few times and then reluctantly spat out the fire crystal core. But in just a few words, it had shrunk several times until it was less than half its original size. Its dazzling appearance had become full of holes, like a stone that had been dug out from a strong acid. Frowning, Qin Yu held it in his palm. The flames in front of him suddenly wriggled, outlining the figure of a woman. The body of the flames was blurry, but it was only a simple curve that accentuated her curvaceous figure. In other words, it was overbearing and domineering. The stone tower coughed. It thought that the fire spirit was truly thorough. It had even chosen a figure that suited Qin Yu's tastes. TSK, TSK. Good intentions, really, really good intentions. The fire spirit bent down and stretched out a finger made of flames. It touched the incomparably ugly fire crystal core. After several breaths of time, it sighed and said, "Master, my senses weren't wrong. This fire crystal core isn't ordinary at all. It should be a restriction on entering and exiting someplace. Unfortunately, it has already been destroyed." Qin Yu frowned. It's completely useless. The fire spirit thought for a moment. That might not be the case. Master, please wait a moment. I can try to activate some of its remaining functions. After the fire spirit finished speaking, the graceful figure drawn out by the flames collapsed into a ball, wrapping around the broken fire crystal core. To be honest, this scene was a bit horrifying to watch. Moreover, it also ruined the beauty of the scene. The stone tower secretly shook his head. He gave the fire spirit an unprofessional evaluation. 10 points deducted. Qin, you certainly wouldn't have any silly thoughts like the stone tower. He calmed his mind and frowned as he waited. Luckily, it didn't take too long. The fire spirit's voice sounded out. It's done. The flames flew away, revealing the graceful figure once more. She hesitated for a moment and then continued to say, Master, I can only repair it a bit. I can't completely restore it, so it's hard to say just how effective it will be. Qin Yu waved his hand, interrupting her. You'll know once you try it. Whether it's good or bad, I won't blame you. Then I ask Master not to resist. I will activate it now and see if I can bring us inside. The fire spirit pointed its finger at the fire crystal core. Its uneven and ugly appearance immediately lit up with many spots of light. The lights weren't united and connected, revealing areas that were damaged. It was clear that this was caused by the furnace swallowing it up. The remnant lights passed through some corners and barely connected together. With a humming sound, a strange fluctuation wrapped around Qin Yu's figure. Shwa! He suddenly vanished from where he stood. The entire following process was similar to a bumpy roller coaster ride that was multiplied by 10 times. Qin Yu's mortal body was powerful enough, but he still felt a stabbing pain. It was like an ordinary person running 10,000 meters in a single breath, his legs aching and weak. Pa! With his feet firmly planted on the ground, he swept his eyes around. His lips curved up in a smile. Although the experience was a bit bad, it seemed that the effect wasn't bad they should have entered. Chapter 1392. There were palaces in this mountain of flames, and there were many of them. At the very least, from where Qin Yu stood, he couldn't see the end of them. The mountain range was uneven and varied in height. These palaces that were built against the mountain range were in various states of disarray. Looking closely, it wasn't that they had been moved here. Rather, it was more like a group of palaces that had suddenly drilled out of the ground and turned into this strange appearance. Flames still burned fiercely, filling the air with scorching heat. The palaces in front of him seemed to have been burned for countless years, but they were still perfectly intact. They weren't perfectly intact. There were many signs of damage, but most of them were caused by external forces and had nothing to do with the flames. Such a group of palaces clearly couldn't be ordinary, and Qin Yu could already feel an unusual aura from them. This was an extremely powerful aura, like a great sun shining in the skies, so dazzling that one couldn't look directly at it. The stone pagoda lightly sighed. Ruler! Only the aura of a supreme existence in the world could infuse into these palaces and cause them to possess the attribute of immortality and indestructibility. And to be able to absorb so much ruler aura, there was only one possibility. This was the residence of a ruler. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. If he said that his heart was still as calm as an ancient well after coming here, that would be a lie. This was the residence of a ruler. If the thing that the Western Wilds and that clan had been searching for so many years truly existed, then it would definitely be here. Looking at it from another angle, if the Western Wilds and that clan didn't hesitate to spend so much time and energy to occupy this zero-world land until now, could what they were searching for be ordinary? Perhaps this group of palaces in front of him hid the key to the realm of rulers. Bang, bang, bang. At this moment, within Qin Yu's chest, his heart violently beat. It was natural for him to be excited. With his current cultivation, he had the qualifications to peek into the realm of rulers. If he could obtain something today, he might be able to reach the heavens in a single bound. The flames outlined a graceful figure. The voice of the fire spirit sounded out, "Master, I have determined the position of the inextinguishable flame. It is here." It lifted a hand and pointed forward. Qin Yu took a deep breath. "Let's go." Shua. Shao Chen's figure flashed as he flew in the direction the fire spirit pointed at. As he flew past the palace, he could clearly feel the powerful will hidden within. This should be Qin Yu's first time directly facing the might of a ruler. As he felt that vast and boundless aura, he found it hard to imagine just what sort of terrifying battle had erupted in the past for such an existence to perish on the spot. However, one thing was certain. The fall of the sovereign had something to do with the western wastelands and that race. As his thoughts raced, his vision blurred. Then he discovered that he had returned to his previous position. Because his heart had been shaken just now, he had carefully observed his surroundings. Through comparing the angle of his surroundings with the hall in front of him, he was able to determine that he had been standing here just now. Illusion? No. Given how powerful the will of the Sovereign Lord was, there was no way that a mere illusion realm could replicate it. There was definitely more to it than met the eye. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. His figure flickered, and he flew in the direction he had been heading. This time he was already prepared and was constantly paying attention to his surroundings. But just as he was about to pass through the grand hall in front of him, another change occurred without warning. Shua! Qin Yu returned to his original position. His eyebrows furrowed even tighter, and a gloomy expression appeared on his face. It wasn't just because he had been teleported back, but more importantly because he hadn't discovered anything even after focusing his divine sense. In other words, Qin Yu still didn't know what had caused him to be sent back to his original position twice in a row. In terms of tenacity and perseverance, Qin Yu definitely passed. He took a deep breath and suppressed the irritation in his heart. Then he flew in another direction. The grand hall was in front of him, and there were paths to the left and right. Since he couldn't go this way, he might as well try going the other way. But unfortunately, there was no pleasant surprise. At almost the same distance, Qin Yu returned to his original position once more. He couldn't go there. It was like there was some sort of spatial lock set up in the space in front of him. As long as he approached a certain position, it would be triggered and he would be sent back to his original position. Whoosh, he continued to fly. This time he went behind him. If he couldn't go forward, then what about going back? The facts proved that the existence of this spatial lock had no blind spots. Shua! Qin Yu appeared in his original position once more. The stone pagoda said, "Master, this should be what I mentioned before. It should be a method of using the great supernatural powers of illusion and reality above the eternal flame. You and I should have fallen into the remnant power left behind by the ruler. The chances of us falling into a hopeless situation aren't high. After all, with the ruler's strength, if he simply wanted to kill someone, he wouldn't need to go through so much trouble. So, I speculate that if we want to leave this place, we can only follow the will of the ruler and move in a way that he allows." Move in a way that the ruler allows. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He looked at the grand hall in front of him. Because of the undulating terrain of the mountain, he couldn't see the entirety of the palace complex. But if he looked forwards from here, he could see that the palaces were connected together. And this was obviously a path. Before, Qin Yu didn't choose to recklessly enter these palaces because he was worried that there would be dangers within. After all, this was the residence of the ruler. Who knew whether or not the rulers will that supported it would crush anyone who entered like a persimmon. But now, it seemed that the stone pagoda speculations were highly likely. Could this be some sort of test? To display one's strength and talent and obtain the approval of the ruler, obtaining the legacy and reaching the peak? It couldn't be. With the status and level of the ruler, he always felt that doing such a thing was a bit degrading. And most importantly, the ruler of this world had clearly been cut down in a miserable manner after a great battle at that time with his experiences. How could he be in the mood to do such a thing? It didn't seem too reliable. The stone pagoda, clearly sensed Qin Yu's ridiculing thoughts. It coughed and said, "Master, we can only give it a try." The word try was well used. The Grand Hall was here, so entering should be simple. But Qin Yu didn't think that directly pushing open the door and entering was a good choice. What if his analysis was wrong? If he angered the ruler's will? Then even with Qin Yu's current strength, he would be nothing more than an unripe persimmon. But a persimmon was a persimmon. It was inevitable that it would be crushed. There was no doubt about this. He only had one life, and he didn't have the nearly undying and indestructible abilities of the Western Desolation and that clan. Thus, he naturally had to cherish his life. And thinking of this, he had to diverge his thoughts. The Western Desolation and that clan had worked together to construct the ship and carried out more than one cruel blood sacrifice. It was clear that they had intruded into the Mountain of Flames many times. So how could they not have discovered this palace complex? Thinking of the ever-burning flame he had seized from Li Yizhou's hands, it was clear that there was a high chance they had already come here. And thinking about it, that might not be the case. Flame life forms also had ever-burning flames within them. If he killed a few more, he could accumulate them. Whatever. Who cared if they came here or not? As long as he was here, that was enough. But how should he try? The stone pagoda fell silent and even restrained its aura. Although it didn't say anything, its meaning was clear. I won't go. Don't even think about it. In fact, Qin Yu didn't have any thoughts of using the stone pagoda to experiment. Right now, it was still very useful. So, Qin Yu looked around and pointed a finger. Fire Spirit, go into the Grand Hall and take a look at the situation. What do you mean, take a look at the situation? The situation was obvious. Who didn't know? To put it in simpler terms, if you went in to look for mines, it would be best if nothing happened. If something happened, then that would be your bad luck. The stone pagoda could clearly feel the resentment coming from the fire spirit. It thought to itself, your good intentions clearly didn't have any effect. In the past, Qin Yu treated other women, especially those who were beautiful and pleasing to the eye, quite gently. How come he changed when it came to you? TSK, I can't figure it out. I really can't figure it out. Besides women, men are also fickle creatures. I'll remember it. The graceful figure drawn out by the flames stiffened for a long time. Then it said, "Yes, master." Its soft voice was cold and filled with resentment. Qin Yu nodded. Hurry. Fuck, this was heartless. If the fire spirit had tears, they would have formed a river of sorrow. It turned and flew towards the Grand Hall, reaching out a hand to push open the doors. Everything went smoothly. Besides a loud bang that was clearly mixed with anger, the fire spirit flew out after several breaths of time. Master, there is no danger. Its voice was hard and harsh. Qin Yu pretended not to hear it. You are just an array spirit, and yet you chose to become a woman, and one with a domineering figure at that. Just what is the meaning of this? Aren't you clearly telling others that I, Qin Yu, am a lustful person? You even gave me a taste. Humph, who gave you the courage? Who was it? You dared to do something like this, and you still think I'll give you face? Just what are you thinking? Whoosh! His figure flashed, and he flew towards the entrance of the Grand Hall. If the fire spirit said there was no problem, then Qin Yu could believe this. She didn't dare to act recklessly. Otherwise, even if something bad happened to her, Qin Yu was confident he would be a step ahead and completely extinguish her. This was also the reason why Qin Yu's attitude was so cold, and he didn't give her any face. Haha, your little life is in my hands, yet you still want to play any tricks? As for the burden in her heart, there was even less of it. After all, if it weren't for Qin Yu, the erased spirit would have already been finished. The doors to the Grand Hall were pushed open, and the interior was unobstructed. Looking around, one could see that everything was luxurious, as if it were new. There wasn't even a speck of dust on the surface. On both sides of the Grand Hall, there were 2 neat rows of over a dozen statues. They wore armor and held swords, spears, swords, halberds, and so on. They were lifelike and gave off an intimidating aura. To be cautious, Qin Yu focused his senses for several breaths of time, focusing on these statues. After confirming that there wasn't anything wrong, he took a deep breath and stepped in. The moment Qin Yu stepped in, there was a light sound in his ears. At the same time, an icy cold thought swept over his body. His first thought was that the fire spirit was quite bold. She actually dared to harm him? Could it be that after she became a woman, she also inherited her natural narrow-mindedness? Wasn't it just that her attitude towards him was a bit worse? Then there was no then, because before Qin Yu had a second thought, the statues that he had focused on came to life. #######. I highly recommend Old Brother Smoking Pipe's new book, Great Nation's Famous Chef. The author's quality is guaranteed and worth reading. Chapter 1393. There weren't any cracks on the surface, nor were there any angry wars or anything like that. They simply came to life in this silent state. Beneath the helmet, their eyes lit up. They were white and emotionless as they stared straight at Qin Yu. Shwa, shwa. Saber lights and sword shadows came crashing down. Well, to be honest, the dubbing automatically appeared in Qin Yu's mind. This was because, just like the resurrection process of the statues, they didn't move when they attacked. But this didn't mean they were weak. On the contrary, they were terrifyingly powerful. This could be seen from Qin Yu's rapidly shrinking pupils. He took a step back and stormed backwards. Facing these statues that had come to life, Qin Yu's first thought was to temporarily avoid them. This was especially true after he felt the terrifying aura contained within these saber lights and sword shadows. But reality soon gave Qin Yu a pleasant surprise. With a loud bang, his chest rolled, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The temple door was open, and he could see inside and outside. When he came in, he didn't feel anything, but now that he wanted to go out, he discovered that it was a one-way door. There was clearly nothing there, but it was like a mountain had been placed there. Qin Yu crashed into it, and there wasn't even the slightest fluctuation. This caused Qin Yu to decisively give up on the idea of forcefully breaking open the door. He looked up at the saber lights and swords, clenching his teeth and shouting, "Fire spirit, just you wait!" Of course, she had to take the blame. But in fact, Qin Yu was well aware that the chances of her deliberately harming him weren't high. But this wasn't important. What was important was that someone had to take the blame. But right now, the most important thing was to try and survive. Otherwise, there was no meaning in taking the blame. His mind raced with all sorts of thoughts. It wasn't that Qin Yu was tired of living and didn't dare to be distracted in the face of danger, but that he could only use this method to make himself less nervous. Yes, Qin Yu was very nervous at this moment. This was because the strength of these statues was terrifyingly strong. Otherwise, the moment he saw them come to life, Qin Yu's first thought wouldn't be to retreat without hesitation. Sabers, spears, swords, and halberds were all silent. But this silence often meant an even greater terror. Qin Yu took a deep breath and punched out. There was a reason why strength could break all methods. No matter how fancy one was, in the face of absolute power, one had to kneel down and call him daddy. But today, Qin Yu didn't think so. He didn't think that his fist could shatter the sword shadows. On the contrary, Qin Yu only wanted to temporarily block them and buy himself more time to find the weaknesses of these statues. The idea was good, the actions were decisive, and the explosive power was extremely great, but this didn't reduce the power of the statues. Puff puff, a dull sound rang out as his flesh and blood was torn apart. Qin Yu stuffily coughed, and his face paled. Reality verified Qin Yu's speculations. In just a single strike, he had been injured, and his injuries were severe. There was something wrong with these statues, given the toughness of the body of Laws. Even if he was attacked, he wouldn't be completely defenseless. However, in the face of these sabers, spears, swords, and halberds, it was as fragile as an eggshell, and it was directly sliced through. Although the wounds on Qin Yu's body seemed like red marks. They were actually shockingly deep. To describe it in a horrifying way, Qin Yu had already been chopped into many pieces. It was only because of his powerful physical body and astonishing vitality that he was barely able to continue sticking them together. Growing and healing was extremely difficult. The wounds caused by the statues contained a formidable cutting strength that could cut through anything. It wasn't just Qin Yu's body of laws, but also any strength that tried to repair the wounds. The so-called all-conquering, all-destroying, this was probably what it meant. It was over. Qin Yu's complexion paled and his eyes darkened. His heart, which had been filled with excitement not too long ago, now turned icy cold. He never thought that someone as powerful as his current realm would actually be unable to deal with a group of dead statues. Well, even though he had sensed that these statues weren't to be trifled with, the degree of terror they displayed far surpassed Qin Yu's expectations. He couldn't block them. This was just a single strike. Unless these statues were all 3-second men, there was no need for more. If they were struck 3 to 5 times in a row, Qin Yu would be killed on the spot. The body of laws was extremely powerful and possessed an incomparably potent vitality. The speed at which they recovered from injuries was astonishing, but these statues didn't give you a chance to recover at all. Every strike was a fatal wound. "Master! Hurry and leave. There is something wrong with these statues." The stone pagoda screamed in alarm and anger, as if it had sensed some horrifying truth. But this sentence was really nonsense. If I could escape, I would have run as far away as I could. Do I need you to remind me? The key was that there was no way to escape. Qin Yu's eyes had already swept around. Besides the door behind him, there were also some tightly shut windows. Not to mention whether he could open them. Even if he could, there was a high probability that they would be like doors. He could see outside, but he couldn't break out. What should he do? Accepting his fate and waiting for death was not something that would happen to Qin Yu. As long as he was breathing, he had to struggle to survive. Besides, he still had a trump card. For example, the sword he had obtained from the dragon Saint's Tear in the East Sea. Qin Yu hadn't seen its power, but he could only barely slash it with the help of the great Tao. This alone was enough to prove how terrifying it was. Although Qin Yu only had half a great Tao now, and the yardmaster had warned him not to use it, he was about to die. Who would have the time to warn her? Qin Yu gritted his teeth, and his eyes lit up. But what happened next made Qin Yu, who was ready to fight to the death, freeze on the spot. The statues that had come to life and seriously injured Qin Yu with a wave of saber light and sword shadows, forcing him to fight desperately, suddenly knelt on one knee. They threw away the sabers, spears, swords, and halberds in their hands and knelt on the ground respectfully. Who can tell me what kind of script this is? If I don't kill you in one wave, we'll recognize you as the main character in a series of idiotic sculptures? Qin Yu's eyes widened, and he almost choked on his own saliva. He coughed violently, just as his brain was running wild with all kinds of nonsensical ideas. The kneeling statues picked up their weapons and returned to their original positions. Then they turned back into a group of cold and motionless statues. This scene made Qin Yu a little disappointed. A second ago, he was still thinking that if he could subdue these statues, he would become a big boss who carried an army with him. What true saint? Try stabbing me in front of you. With a wave of his hand, a group of statues would go over, and with a swing of his saber, they would be chopped into 70 or 80 pieces. Are you afraid or not? But unfortunately, before this beautiful dream could even begin, it was shattered. Hiss! Qin Yu sucked in a breath of cold air. His mind was in turmoil, and he relaxed for a moment. Then he suddenly felt a terror that made his entire body twitch. Intense pain. This group of damned statues, they were really heavy-handed. But everything in front of him was strange and inexplicable. Who knew if they would suddenly come to life and teach Qin Yu another lesson? So he had to hurry and leave this place. His figure moved, and Qin Yu appeared at the entrance of the hall. He stretched out his hand, and sure enough, the invisible shackles disappeared. Joy appeared on his face, but he only took one step before he stopped. After suffering a wave of saber light and sword shadows, his entire body was almost chopped into minced meat. Was he going to suffer such a great loss for nothing? He turned his head and looked into the depths of the hall, and then looked at the group of silent statues. Qin Yu clenched his teeth. Wealth comes from danger. I'll go all out. Of course. Another important reason that prompted Qin Yu to make this risky decision was that even if he left the hall from here, what should he do next? No matter which direction he went, he would be forcefully brought back to this place. Unless he waited for death, he would have to come back sooner or later. Since that was the case, he might as well take a gamble now. Whoosh! Qin Yu's figure moved, leaving behind a series of afterimages in the air. His speed erupted to the limit as he rushed towards the other end of the hall. Everything went smoothly. The statues remained motionless, maintaining their silent state. There were no other dangers within the hall. Whew! He let out a long breath. It wasn't that Qin Yu was a coward, but that this hall was far too terrifying. If those statues came to life again, then to be honest, Qin Yu didn't have full confidence that he would be able to escape unscathed. A door appeared in his line of sight. Sure enough, the front and back of the hall could be entered and exited. Qin Yu's eyes brightened, just as he was about to speed up and rush out. He suddenly saw a stone wall on the left side of the hall. On it were some strange lines that seemed messy at first, but upon closer inspection, one could naturally understand their meaning. Qin Yu's heart skipped a beat. Although he couldn't see them clearly, his intuition told him that these lines on the stone wall weren't simple. Subconsciously, he stopped and looked at them. In almost an instant, Qin Yu's consciousness was drawn in. This is... Qin Yu couldn't help but widen his eyes. His face was filled with shock, and he cried out in his heart, "That's right, that's right!" Wasn't it said in the script that the protagonist would go through untold hardships to pass through a series of extremely difficult tests, and after passing them, there would definitely be a reward? Simply put, it was like hitting someone with a stick and then giving them a carrot. Although Qin Yu hadn't experienced a series of tests and it had ended abruptly and inexplicably, he had definitely risked his life. The difficulty level was high enough to receive a carrot. Although the statues in the hall hadn't woken up yet, the danger couldn't be completely ruled out. Thus, the best choice was to immediately leave. But to leave like this, no, that was impossible. He couldn't leave. Even if he had to endure that wave of saber lights and sword shadows just now, he absolutely couldn't leave. Stone Pagoda, guard the pass for me. Qin Yu sat down cross-legged. His eyes flashed with a sharp light as he stared at the lines on the wall, entranced. Stone Pagoda, what the hell? You suddenly went into seclusion? What's going on now? Can't you figure out what's going on? But as soon as Qin Yu finished speaking, he didn't give it a chance to object. As for whether or not it should wake Qin Yu up and have him calm down and leave, all right, this thought only appeared for a moment before it was suppressed by the Stone Pagoda without hesitation. Qin Yu wasn't someone who couldn't remain calm. If he didn't even care about the dangers and directly asked it to guard the pass, then these lines on the wall must be extremely important. If it disturbed him now, then there was absolutely no room for discussion. Chapter 1394. What a bitter life. Just as you were about to get out of danger, something like this suddenly appeared. You couldn't even resist and could only endure it. The Stone Pagoda Phantom appeared and covered Qin Yu. He thought for a moment and said, "Fire Spirit, take a look at the gate in front of us. Can we really leave?" The Fire Spirit nodded woodenly. Of course, it understood that this was another arrangement for it to act as a pathfinder. She didn't dare to resist Qin Yu's will. As for the Stone Pagoda, forget it, she still didn't dare. If she had known that the spiritual world would be so tragic, she would have just dissipated back then. Forget it. It was better to be alive. She had never truly seen this beautiful and colorful world. With a slight movement, the fire spirit floated over and pushed outwards. The door quietly opened, and the entire process was as smooth as before. Shirta said, "Let's go out and take a look." Don't go too far. The fire spirit clenched its teeth. It flew out of the hall and returned after several breaths of time. It's safe. Its voice was icy cold, filled with dissatisfaction. Qin Yu was like this, and the stone pagoda was like this. Did she deserve to be bullied? In this kind of living environment, who would still be in the mood to speak nicely? Shirta let out a long breath of relief. Luckily, even if there really was danger, Qin Yu would still be able to escape at this distance. As for the fire spirit's attitude, that was a small matter. She was a woman, so he just had to coax her a little. If it wasn't enough, he would coax her again. The lines on the wall were like scribbles, and Qin Yu looked as if he had seen a beautiful woman stripping. What was going on? Shirta finally had the mood to look at it. After a few glances, he let out a muffled groan. He felt as if he had been hit in the head by a ruthless stick, or as if he had been hit by an invigilator's elbow when he was cheating on an exam. Fuck, if you don't tell me, how would I know? Only Qin, you can see these things on the wall? Also, I didn't look much, just up and down a few times. Was there a need to be so ruthless? Fortunately, I don't have a pair of eyes, or else I'd definitely be black and blue. Bam, another strike. The stone tower was speechless. Can't I even think about it? So domineering. I'm a coward. Boss, please spare me. The fire spirit shivered. She saw the phantom of the stone tower tremble twice, and then she felt a suffocating pressure in the air. Sovereign will. In the silence, time slowly passed in the hall. Finally, 2 hours later, Qin Yu's body shook and his dazed eyes regained focus. The moment he woke up, the weed-like lines on the stone walls of the hall began to disappear. Starting from the center, it continued to spread outwards. The emptiness devoured everything until there was nothing left. It was as if the lines that Qin Yu had seen before didn't exist at all. Shirta muttered, "So this thing can only be given to one person." Previously, he had taken a few peeks and tried his best to memorize some of the things. Now, it was as if someone had erased all of them, leaving nothing in his mind. A hegemon relic. Without a doubt, this was the relic of the Sovereign Lord. Could it be that his luck was so good that he had obtained an ultimate treasure chest in the very first palace? Master! Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted. Qin Yu said, "It's not what you think it is. So, hold back your excitement and saliva for now. We'll talk about it after we leave this place." Swish he dashed out of the hall. Fire spirit. Why didn't I die then? Can't you see me? He didn't care or ask about it. I was the one who opened the door, and I was the one who checked outside. Although there was an accident earlier, it wasn't because of me. She was angry and wronged. The fire spirit bit her lips and chased after him. But a stubborn seed that yearned for freedom in her heart sprouted at this moment. She wanted freedom. She wanted her spiritual authority. Qin Yu stood outside the hall. This should have been a square, but now it had been forcefully pulled into a slope by a mountain peak. As he thought, passing through the hall was the path that the Sovereign Lord will allowed. All other paths couldn't be taken. It was just that these halls were a bit too terrifying. Just randomly opening one of them had nearly cost him his life. Qin Yu let out a deep breath. What is recorded on the stone wall is a body transformation supernatural ability. It requires a body of rules as the starting point. It's hard to say exactly, but it is extremely fierce. This could be considered an explanation for the stone tower. Right now, it was so curious that it nearly exploded. As it heard this, it nodded again and again, but its eyes still fervently stared at Qin Yu. It was clear that this wasn't all it cared about. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. Don't ask me. I'm also fascinated right now. He really couldn't figure out why the statue had suddenly stopped and even knelt down. The stone tower coughed lightly. Master, are you hiding something? For instance, something about your life, background, or something like that. Qin Yu's lips twitched. Did you read too many novels out of boredom? How could there be so many people in this world who pretend to be pigs to eat tigers? The stone tower, thinking about it, it nodded. It had followed Chinyu for a long time. If there really was some secret, it should have been able to detect it. That's strange. Chinyu rubbed his temples. If there's something I can't figure out, then I'll put it aside for now. Perhaps the answer will pop out on its own in the future. As for his own life, he had some guesses. But if one said that these palaces were related to some clan, Chinyu absolutely didn't believe it. If that was the case, then why would they spend so much effort searching for him outside for so many years? In the end, Chinyu and several old monsters teamed up to pluck away the peaches. Forget it. Just like he said, he would put it aside for now. He turned to look at the fire spirit that was quietly floating to the side, silently expressing its dissatisfaction. Chinyu frowned. Do you feel wronged? The fire spirit stiffly said, I don't dare. That's right. Chinyu sneered. Just now in the hall I almost died. You saw it with your own eyes. Didn't you say that there was no problem? Just because of this, you don't have the qualifications to feel wronged? The fire spirit wanted to cry. You clearly sensed that there was no problem before you went in. Also, when I went in first, nothing happened. You saw it for yourself. But Chin, you clearly didn't plan on reasoning with her. Continue to explore. Remember, I will only allow you to make the same mistake once. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. The fire spirit cried as she walked away. The stone tower coughed. Master, isn't that a bit too much? After all, she is a woman, and we still need her right now. Chinyu lightly said, You really don't understand. The stone tower was silent for a moment. It whispered, I might understand a little. Chinyu humphed. Then what are you still wasting time talking about? From the very start, the fire spirit had ill intentions, so it was only natural that she would receive Chinyu's icy and blunt attitude. His goal was to tell her to put away all small thoughts and not do anything stupid, perverted. Chin, you really didn't know where the fire spirit of the array spirit tablet had come up with this conclusion about him. It was simply ridiculous. Of course, there was another important reason for doing this. When he collected the everlasting flame and even other flames in the future, the fire spirit would be a great help. The furnace could absorb the most powerful flames in the world and constantly transform. Absorbing the eternal night flame was one, and finding the everlasting flame today was two. But anyone with a little bit of math would know that after 1 and 2 came 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on and so forth. There were far too many of them. At the very least, Chin, you didn't know how many people there were in this big family. Although the furnace couldn't eat so many, the first 10 shouldn't be a problem. In other words, for a long time to come, the fire spirit would have to be by his side, and it would be of great use. In this sort of situation, if he wanted to use it with peace of mind, he would have to beat her up and help her understand her position. Otherwise, if she dared to have such thoughts about Chinyu, did she really think he was a good person? Ha, I won't destroy the fire spirit, but will you believe me when I say I will directly seal it? He sat down cross-legged to heal his injuries. The wounds left by the sword shadows seemed to have healed on the surface, but the internal slash marks were still extremely clear. For example, Chinyu was like a terracotta statue that looked fine on the surface but was riddled with cracks on the inside. But now these injuries, in Chinyu's opinion, came at just the right time. It wasn't that he was a psychopath and actually felt that being injured was something enjoyable. Rather, it was a good opportunity to verify that the body tempering technique he had learned from the Stonewall was a top-notch, great, divine ability that required the body of laws as the starting point. That's right, from Chinyu's point of view, this body refining technique had enough qualifications to be called a supernatural power. Picking stars. This was the name of the body refining technique on the stone wall. The simple explanation was that after cultivating this technique, one could use the power of their body to pick stars with a wave of their hand. And now, Chinyu certainly knew that the so-called stars in the galaxy, each one corresponded to a small world. Thus, if his understanding wasn't wrong, and the person who left behind this body refining technique wasn't bragging, then as long as one cultivated it to the large success level, one could summon world-destroying punishment with a wave of a hand. All right, to be honest, when Cheney first saw it, he also thought it was bragging. Having cultivated the body of laws, he still had some say in the aspect of body tempering. It was still possible for a strong body to be immortal and indestructible, but to say that he was strong enough to destroy the heavens and earth with just a punch or a kick was indeed too fantastical. But since he had learned it, there was no harm in practicing it. After all, it was a ruler's relic. Although it had nothing to do with breaking through to the ruler realm, even if it was bragging, its power shouldn't be too disappointing. In fact, Cheney wasn't disappointed. When he pushed the blood energy in his body according to the contents of picking stars, he had already cultivated it for a long time. It was as if his body of laws had just been activated, strong and firm, like a towering mountain that could not be bent in the slightest. Dong! Dong! In his chest, his heart was vigorously beating. His blood was pushed through his body, circulating at an astonishing speed. Steam was released, forming a white fog above Chenyu's head. His exposed flesh and blood were red, like iron ingots being heated in a furnace. Fierce, overbearing, ruthless, he was like an awakened, vicious beast. Within his body, the numerous wounds were healing at an astonishing speed under the high temperature of his flesh and blood. Kacha! Kacha! This was the stone slab beneath him. It couldn't withstand his aura and began to crack apart. The punching bag brand fire spirit flew back, panting with rage, just in time to see the scene in front of it. With a cry of alarm, the flame figure instantly distorted. It was so frightened by Chenyu's aura that it nearly collapsed on the spot. Picking stars. What a good picking stars. The products of a ruler were truly top quality. No, a simple top quality evaluation wasn't enough to truly reflect the preciousness of picking stars. Based on the feedback Chenyu received when he first cultivated it, it was hard to say whether or not he could summon the power to destroy the world with a wave of his hand once he cultivated it to large success. But if he used it to kill people, it would definitely be more than enough. A single punch would smash a pile of dregs. Now, Chenyu felt that even if he only used the strength of his mortal body, he was confident he could fight a true saint. And this was only the beginning of cultivation. At most, he had just touched upon it. He was still some distance away from crossing the threshold. If he continued to cultivate it, the degree of improvement could be imagined. The name Picking Stars was truly fitting. In normal circumstances, if one obtained such a heaven-defying supernatural power, they would immediately go into seclusion to cultivate it. Even 100 years wouldn't be too long. But right now, it was clear he was in an abnormal state. Taking a deep breath, Chenyu forced himself to break free from his impatient cultivation state. As he suppressed the roaring blood in his body, the boiling heat around him gradually dissipated. Pata! The fire spirit fell to the ground. Its flame body shattered, and it shrank into a palm-sized ball of fire, shivering in fear. Terrifying, far too terrifying. Chenyu's aura just now made her feel as if he was a monster that wanted to destroy everything. She didn't even dare to run away. The accumulated resentment in the heart of the fire spirit, as well as some immature thoughts, all vanished at this moment. She had no choice but to disperse. If Chenyu was this fierce and wanted to continue doing anything, then that was simply seeking death. Don't look at how the fire spirit had thought about why she hadn't died earlier. In truth, in terms of fear of death, even if she couldn't compare to the shadow of the abyss, the difference wasn't too great. Just think about it. An array spirit that didn't have long to live had managed to survive and obtain a lucky chance to fuse together with a fire spirit, allowing her to exist in this world for a long time. This was simply the smallest probability among the smallest probability. She hadn't even had time to look at the world and enjoy the beautiful life that only existed in her imagination. And now she was asking the fire spirit to die? Forget it. It wasn't bad to live on. If that wasn't enough, then she could live a bit more. Qin Yu definitely wouldn't have thought that his plan to teach the fire spirit a lesson would suddenly succeed because of this matter. Shi Ta was extremely excited. After learning that that race was a colossus that could compare with the Western desolation, and also vaguely knowing that they came from another world, he felt a bit lost in his heart. This was because the possibility of revenge had suddenly become slim. No matter how strong Qin Yu was, could he compare with the half-step emperor realm that the divine dragon appeared? Not to mention, even if he used his knees to think, he knew that a half-step emperor was definitely not the strongest expert of that race. This was a matter that made one feel despair, especially when there was just a glimmer of hope for revenge. But it was extinguished in the blink of an eye. The huge psychological gap left Shi Ta at a loss. But now, the fire of hope was ignited once more. So what if that race was strong? Qin Yu was always a person that could constantly give people pleasant surprises. When he first followed him, Qin Yu was just a slightly stronger ant. He simply didn't know how high the heavens were and how deep the earth was. But now, with a flap of his wings, he could soar 90,000 miles. The current Qin Yu could say that he was at the peak of Vast Yang, the peak below the ruler realm. Moreover, with Qin Yu's luck, it was normal for him to have harvests in the ruins of a ruler. Star plucking was the best example. Was the ruler realm far away? No, it was already very close. Even if that race was in another world and their strength was extremely terrifying. So what? One day, he would bring Qin Yu there and slaughter his way over. ###### recommended Pipe Brothers' new book, Great Nation's Famous Chef. It was the story of a son-in-law's counterattack. It was worth reading. Chapter 1395. While the stone tower was shamelessly boasting, someone had already begun to fight. The two participants were the resentful spirit Plaque, Li Siji, and Seamless Saint, who had previously come to an agreement through threats. It had to be said that these two were truly miserable. They had aggressively tried to kill Yao Tao and Qin Yu, but in the end they were pressed to the ground and violently rubbed against each other. They had basically lost everything, and each of them was only left with their underpants. After suffering such a great loss, the two could be said to be brothers in hardship. However, the scene of hugging and crying and supporting each other would not appear on the two of them. They had chosen to target each other, to devour each other, and all their previous losses would be recovered, and they might even gain something. This was probably what it meant by birds of a feather flocking together. As for who had made the first move, it was already difficult to investigate. However, this was not important, because the moment they turned hostile, Seamless Saint and Li Siji knew that they had the same idea. Li Siji was beaten by Yao Tao, and Seamless Saint was deceived by Qin Yu's acting. The strength of both sides had been reduced, and for a moment it was hard to tell who would win. Roar! With a roar, Li Siji suddenly opened his mouth to an astonishing degree. Like a huge black hole, he swallowed Seamless Saint into his stomach. However, the fight did not end because of this. Or more accurately, Li Siji, who seemed to have the upper hand and swallowed Seamless Saint, might have been tricked. Because at the moment Seamless Saint was swallowed, black flames suddenly gushed out from Li Siji's mouth, nose, and ears, submerging him in the blink of an eye. You dare to devour a ghost path powerhouse. I'm afraid you don't know how the word death is written. Seamless Saint sneered, coming from the black flames. Li Siji growled. Then let's see who can survive until the end. Boom! Within the black flames, a thick, blood-red color gushed out, tumbling like a blood mist. Black and red intertwined in front of everyone's eyes. Yao Tao curled up. Her entire body was almost perfectly round, like a bubble, quietly suspended in the flames. If one looked closer, they would discover that on her fair and delicate skin, there were now some faint golden patterns. In the burning of the everlasting flame, the golden patterns constantly surged, and light spots gathered from all directions, pouring into her body. As time passed, Yao Tao's weak aura was rapidly recovering. The activation of her second personality placed a great burden on her. It was similar to a state where she would explode with super strength and overdraft her potential. Therefore, after her second personality had awakened twice, Yao Tao had to go into a short hibernation to recover her strength as soon as possible. However, sleeping didn't mean that Yao Tao was powerless to protect herself. On the contrary, the current Yao Tao might be in an even more dangerous situation. Amidst the twisting flames, a pair of cold and ruthless eyes appeared. This flame creature had locked onto Yao Tao. After waiting for a long time, it had finally decided to attack. It leaped out and opened its mouth wide. Blazing flames began to condense, and the temperature within a small area rapidly rose. Roar accompanied by the roar, flames shot out like a fire dragon rushing towards Yao Tao. However, just as the fire dragon was about to touch Yao Tao, the faint golden patterns on her body suddenly lit up. Then everything fell silent. The roaring fire dragon, the sneak attack of the flaming creatures, and even the wantonly burning, undying flames in the surroundings. In the next moment, the fire dragon and the fire creature that had ambushed him shattered and dissipated at the same time. The burning, eternal flames in the surroundings started pulsating again. The entire process was incomparably quiet. There was not the slightest sound, and everything returned to its previous state as if nothing had happened. Although he had basically determined that he had to pass through the main hall in order to move around, Qin Yu still tried several more times to determine that he couldn't pass through these unorthodox methods. Then he frowned and looked forwards. The second main hall. Although Qin Yu had already experienced this once, and he had smoothly obtained some benefits, he still couldn't help but feel his heart racing. This time, there were no statues in the main hall. Instead, there were pictures of a group of dancing women on the ground. It was as if there really had been a group of girls dancing in this hall a long, long time ago when they had been sucked into the floor. The word lifelike was no longer enough to describe what he was feeling right now. This was because when he looked down, he could clearly hear the cheerful and joyous music playing in his ears, and he could even see the beautiful movements of the dancers in front of him. Qin Yu was willing to bet the dog head of the stone pagoda that in this seemingly tranquil main hall, the troublesome things were definitely these pictures of women. The fire spirit had already circled around inside many times, but nothing had happened. It was clearly telling Qin Yu that it wasn't going to take the blame. You saw it with your own eyes. If you wanted to come in, then come in. If you didn't want to, then stay outside. Life was just so helpless. Sometimes, even if you knew there was a giant pit in front of you, you could only brace yourself and jump in. Qin Yu took a deep breath and stepped into the main hall. The moment he entered, he heard a light hum in his ears. What followed was an ice-cold thought that swept over them. It really came. A pleasant zither sounded out, followed by the sound of a flute, and then a pipa and zither. In the blink of an eye, a beautiful piece of music appeared. It was like a trickling stream of water that flowed into his heart, instantly intoxicating him. Qin Yu fiercely bit down on the tip of his tongue to extricate himself from the music. He thought to himself that the products of this main hall were truly terrifying. Just a single piece of music had instantly drawn his mind in. And this was when Qin Yu was on guard and his mind was tense. In short, this was terrifying to the extreme. A woman began to sing. Her voice was graceful and graceful. It was impossible to hear what she was singing, but it immediately caused a spiritual resonance. Qin Yu had just regained consciousness, but he was almost sucked in again. He bitterly smiled and bit down on his tongue. The sun and moon force field revolved normally. It was clear that he hadn't noticed anything wrong. It seemed that this music and song weren't soul attacks in the traditional sense. The women on the floor began to walk out one at a time. They smiled, their eyes sparkling. Their eyes wandered over Qin Yu's body, wanting to say something. Some people began to dance. Their graceful figures were like rainbows and bright moons. Thus, Qin Yu's tongue was damaged and his mouth was filled with the smell of blood. He knew that everything in front of him was an illusion and that there was a killing trap hidden within this illusion. But he still couldn't maintain a clear mind. This matter was simple to say, but only by carefully thinking about it could one feel the horrifying horror contained within. It could be summarized as if you didn't want to die and you were willing to die on your own initiative. During the entire process, you were clear-headed, but you couldn't control yourself. Qin Yu wasn't sure how long he could last. Perhaps the next time his consciousness blurred, he wouldn't be able to wake up again. As for what would happen if he didn't wake up, there was no need to say anything. Even Qin Yu's knees were clear on this. Then he might as well give it a try, although he didn't have the slightest assurance that he could succeed, and this matter itself was strange and unreasonable. At this time, if he wanted to continue down this path, he could only give it a try. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu opened his mouth and pushed outwards. Bah! The blood that filled his mouth from biting his tongue was finally put to use. As it fell to the ground, it was instantly absorbed. Shwa! The sounds of musical instruments vanished, and the moving voices stopped. The dancing figures trembled as they knelt on the ground. They kowtowed to Qin Yu 3 times in succession before vanishing like smoke. The entire hall fell deathly silent, although Qin Yu must have held some expectations in his heart before doing this. When the result appeared, he felt a bit dizzy. It ended like this. It was just a mouthful of blood, and it was even caused by Qin Yu himself. The stone pagoda's faint voice sounded out. Master, at a time like this, do you still wish to continue hiding your identity? Qin Yu, what could he say? He felt that there was no way to explain this matter. His eyes swept around in a daze. The fire spirit also stared at him, a look of realization on her face. No wonder Qin Yu gave off such a terrifying feeling. It turned out that he had a great background. Sure enough, her decision to put away her thoughts was correct. Otherwise, she would have been finished. Who? Qin Yu let out a long breath. Now, he could confirm that there was some unknown connection between him and these palaces. Or, it was more accurate to say that the ruler who had already perished here was somehow related to Qin Yu. This was the only explanation. Otherwise, if anyone thought that they could casually pass by just spitting out a mouthful of blood, that would simply be the greatest joke in the world. Qin Yu's thoughts raced. Right now, he had 2 guesses. One was the little blue lamp. That fellow seemed to be addicted to disappearing. Currently, there was only a faint connection between it and Qin Yu, and it didn't speak or move at all. But with the mysteriousness of the little blue lamp and the various miracles it displayed, it was normal for it to be related to the ruler of this world. The other one was the mysterious woman with a blurry face in the shadow of the sun and moon. Out of all the secrets on Qin Yu's body, she was the most unfathomable. From what he could see now, not even a true saint could compare with her. And above a true saint was naturally a ruler. A thought suddenly sprang into his mind. Could it be that the ruler of this world hadn't perished at all, but had used some method to escape? But that couldn't be right. The reason why the Garden Master and Sage Scholatry were able to achieve the great Tao with their different identities was because they had been nourished by the body of a true saint. From this, it could be seen that a true saint had truly perished here. Qin Yu raised a hand and rubbed his eyebrows. He felt as if there was a paste in his head and everything was blurry. However, his advantage was that he could temporarily put aside things that he couldn't understand or couldn't deal with. After all, strictly speaking, this matter wasn't bad for Qin Yu. Instead, it was a great help. He could directly pass by just spitting out a mouthful of blood. If such a good thing were to spread out, who knew how many people would turn red with envy? It had to be known that clearing a level wasn't just passing a level. The previous hall had given him a sweet date, so there was no reason not to do the same here. After all, in terms of the degree of danger, even though the statues that slashed down the sword shadows were extremely terrifying, he could at least think of a way to resist them. These singing and dancing women were the ones who could kill people invisibly. In comparison, they were even more terrifying. Qin Yu ignored the stone pagoda's questions and ignored the eyes of the fire spirit. He rushed to the other side of the hall. Suddenly his eyes brightened. There really was a date.